Hey guys! Before we begin tonight, find whatever position feels right. Pull the covers a little closer if you need to. Let go of anything you were holding onto from the day. None of it needs you anymore. Not tonight. Tonight, we're following the story of a 15-year-old girl who grew up barefoot by a lake in Bavaria, who could swim and fish and ride better than most of the boys she knew, and who, in the space of 3 August days, found herself engaged to the most powerful young man in Europe. It sounds like a fairy tale. And for a little while, it almost was. But fairy tales, the real ones, the ones people actually lived, those have a weight to them that the storybook versions leave out. We'll feel that weight tonight, slowly, gently, in the small true details of what happened. If these quiet evenings help you rest, you're warmly welcome to subscribe to the channel so another night like this one can find you again. And if you'd like to leave a word or two below about where you're listening from tonight, that helps other people find their way here too. There is no rush. It can wait until morning. It can wait forever. For now, there is only the stillness around you. A long, slow story, waiting to begin. So let your eyes close whenever they want to. Let the room go soft, and when you're ready, we'll step out into a summer morning on the shore of a Bavarian lake, where a girl with long braids is climbing down to the water, and the future hasn't found her yet. The year is 1853, and somewhere in the Austrian Alps, in a small lakeside town called Ischl, a teenage girl is about to walk into a room full of strangers and change the course of an empire, without meaning to, without understanding it, and without anyone asking whether she was ready. She doesn't belong here, not really. She was brought along as an afterthought, a younger sister tagging behind the real candidate, the one everybody had spent months preparing. Her hair isn't properly done. Her dress is black because someone in the family has died, and the luggage with the nice clothes hasn't arrived yet. She's shy, and she's hungry, and she can't eat because there are too many people looking at her. And somewhere across this stiff, awkward tea table, a young emperor, 23 years old, the absolute ruler of 40 million souls, looks at her and feels something shift behind his ribs. Not at her older sister, the one his mother picked. At her, the quiet one with the braids. What happens next takes about 72 hours. 3 days of summer evenings, 1 birthday ball, a bouquet she doesn't understand, and a sentence whispered to a priest in a small parish church. That's all it takes. And by the time she boards a steamship on the Danube 8 months later, sailing toward Vienna under a canopy of roses with cannon fire echoing off the riverbanks, she is no longer the girl from the lake. She's something else now, something the whole empire is watching. But here's what stays with me. The fairy tale is real. All of it happened. The love at first sight, the wrong sister, the girl who says she isn't good enough. It all happened. And so did what came after. The golden doors that close behind her one by one. The mother-in-law at breakfast the morning after the wedding. The rules about shoes. The poems she writes alone in a palace while her husband commutes to his desk, and her sister goes home without her. We'll walk through all of it tonight, slowly. We won't hurry past any of it. Let's begin on a summer morning in Bavaria, at the edge of a lake, in the years before anyone came looking for her. There's a lake in Bavaria that sits so still on a summer morning you'd swear it was holding its breath. Starnberger Sea, they call it, long and narrow, cradled between low green hills to the east and the first serious shadows of the Alps to the south. The water is cold even in July. It has that particular colour of deep alpine lakes, a kind of grey-green that shifts toward blue when the light gets high enough. And on a morning like this, with the mist still curled above the surface, it looks like something out of a painting nobody's finished yet. On the western shore, set back just far enough from the water to keep its foundations dry, there's a house. Not grand, not really, not by the standards of the family that lives in it. It's a summer place, old and rambling, with a garden that slopes down to the lake and a view across the water toward the mountains. The locals call it Possenhofen, or just Posse, and if you were walking past on a summer morning in the 1840s, you'd hear it before you saw it. Dogs barking, children shouting. Somewhere, faintly, the strange thin sound of a zither being played not particularly well, but with tremendous conviction. This is where she grows up. The girl we're here for tonight, Elisabeth Amalie Eugenie, Herzogin in Bayern, though nobody calls her any of that. They call her Sisi. She's one of 8 children, somewhere in the middle of the tangle, and she runs half wild through these summers as though the future will never come looking for her. And I think that's where this story really starts. Not with emperors or crowns or Vienna. It starts here, at the water's edge, with a girl who doesn't know she's going to become anyone. Her father is Duke Max in Bayern, and he's one of the most peculiar men in the whole sprawling web of European aristocracy. He holds the rank of general in the Bavarian army, but that's mostly decorative. He draws a handsome annual allowance of 250,000 gulden from the state, and he spends it on exactly what pleases him. What pleases him is the zither. He plays it at breakfast. He plays it on the road. He once hauled it to the top of the Great Pyramid in Egypt and sat there in the blazing sun, playing Bavarian folk songs to a group of very confused Egyptian guides, while the desert stretched out below him in every direction. He published a collection of these tunes, proper sheet music with his name on the cover, and he published a travel book about the Orient too, in which he left a few lines deliberately blank on certain pages and labelled them, with a straight face, censorship gaps. This was his sense of humour. This was the man. In the courtyard of his palace on Munich's Ludwigstrasse, he'd built a working circus ring, a real one, with tiered seating and proper lighting open to the public. He performed trick riding there, surrounded by pantomimes and clowns, while Munich's aristocracy sat in the audience and tried to decide whether they were charmed or appalled. Upstairs in the dance hall, a fresco by Schwantler ran 44 metres along the wall. A vast, exuberant procession of Bacchus and his followers, more than a little scandalous by the standards of the day. Dukes weren't supposed to live like this. That was precisely why Max did. You know what I keep coming back to about Duke Max? He had absolutely no interest in being what his title said he was. He'd spent 7 years in a regular school, not with a private tutor the way aristocrats were supposed to be raised, but sitting alongside ordinary children in a Munich boarding school. He went to university lectures, history, natural history, and he never lost the habits he'd picked up there. He kept a library of 27,000 books, mostly historical. He surrounded himself with writers and musicians and scholars, his so-called Artusrunde, his round table, and they'd drink and argue and compose songs together late into the night while the rest of Munich's court society looked on with something between amusement and quiet alarm. They drank a great deal, this group. They debated at a level that would have put many university salons to shame, and at midday, every single day without exception, Max disappeared into his private rooms to eat lunch with his 2 illegitimate daughters, whom he loved openly and without apology. His wife and his 8 legitimate children were not invited. Noon was sacred. Noon belonged to the other family. He wore his democratic opinions like a costume, just to watch who it would bother. But if he thought someone was stepping on his corns, a relative observed dryly, all hell broke loose. When the revolution came to Munich in 1848, and the royal family needed somewhere safe to shelter from the street mobs, they came to Max's palace, because the crowds liked him, because he was the one Wittelsbach nobody wanted to hurt. His oldest daughter Aline, 14 years old, reportedly leaned out a window during the turmoil and called down to the protesters, "Brothers against brothers," which made everyone laugh, and proved, people said, that she was certainly her father's daughter. There's something here I can't quite let go of. The man who built a circus in his courtyard and carried a zither to the pyramids and left joke censorship gaps in his published books. That's the man who raised Sisi. Not carefully, not attentively, not even particularly well. He neglected his family duties with the same cheerful confidence he brought to everything else. But he raised her in a house where the rules were optional and the doors were mostly open, and nobody pretended to be anything they weren't. The air in that house smelled like horse sweat and printer's ink and whatever the kitchen was making, and the sound of it was laughter and argument and a zither played with more feeling than skill. That matters. It matters enormously for everything that comes later, because it means Sisi grows up believing that this is what life is, that this is normal. There's another thing about Possenhofen that the histories don't always say enough about, and it's the simplest thing of all, the sound of the place. Not silence exactly. Posse is never silent. Not with 8 children and a house full of dogs and horses in the stable and ducks down by the water. But it's the particular sound of a house where nobody's watching. The creak of old floorboards under bare feet. The splash of someone going into the lake before the air has warmed. A piano being practiced badly in a far room, abandoned after 10 minutes. Geese arguing in the yard. This is the texture of Sisi's childhood. Not quiet, but unobserved. She can move through her own days without anyone tracking where she is or what she's doing or whether she's standing correctly. She doesn't know yet that this is rare. She doesn't know yet that most of the women in her family have never had it. The siblings are a world of their own. Ludwig, the eldest brother, is already showing signs of the dark moods that will mark the Wittelsbach family for generations. Helene, the firstborn daughter, Nene, everyone calls her, is steady and serious and carries herself like someone who expects to be looked at. Then comes Sisi, the second girl, half in Helene's shadow and half outside it. Below her come Carl Theodor, the one she's closest to, her Gackle, and then the younger ones trailing behind like a flock of ducklings. They fight, they make up, they speak in codes and private jokes and shared languages that shut out the adult world, and on summer evenings they scatter through the grounds of Posse like seeds thrown into wind. Sisi's mother, Duchess Ludovica, is a different story entirely. She's one of 9 daughters of the old Bavarian king Max I, and among her sisters she drew the shortest straw. Her older sister Sophie married into the Austrian imperial house, and became, in time, the real power behind the Habsburg throne, the woman people called the only man at court. Another sister became Queen of Saxony, another became Queen of Prussia. Ludovica got a cousin, a second cousin technically, Duke Max, with his zither and his circus and his very public disinterest in domestic life. She'd been beautiful once. Some people said she'd been lovelier than any of her daughters would turn out to be, including Elisabeth. She'd had a romance with a Portuguese prince, Miguel of Braganza, and been told she couldn't marry him. The match didn't suit the politics, so the family arranged the marriage with Max instead, and Max told her honestly, on the day he proposed, that he didn't love her. He was marrying her because his grandfather frightened him into it. Their first wedding anniversary, Ludovica told her children later, she spent the entire day crying, from morning to evening without stopping. She learned year by year to tolerate the restlessness and the affairs and the long absences. She learned to raise the children alone and to manage the household without help, and to look the other way at noon when Max went to eat with his other daughters. As a widow, decades later, she told her grandchildren that Max had finally been kind to her from their golden anniversary onward. 50 bitter years before that. I think about Ludovica sometimes, sitting alone in the Possenhofen drawing room in the evening, winding one of her clocks. She collected clocks. She read missionary calendars and believed this counted as studying geography. Her husband made fun of her for it. Her powerful sister Sophie sent long letters full of instructions that Ludovica followed with anxious obedience, terrified of losing Sophie's approval. She was, by her own description, completely peasantified. She used the word herself, living far from court life, not caring about fashionable clothes or aristocratic gossip, just trying to get through the days. And yet she loved her children with a fierceness that had nowhere else to go. She raised them herself, which was almost unheard of in aristocratic families of this period. Mothers in the high nobility handed their infants to wet nurses and their children to governesses. Ludovica kept hers. She washed their faces and heard their prayers and sat through their fevers, and she told them, perhaps more than she should have, about the disappointments that had shaped her own life. Sisi heard all of it. She heard her mother say it more than once, that quiet sentence that settles at the bottom of a child's understanding and never quite leaves. When you're married, you feel so alone. But that's the grown-up world, and the grown-up world hasn't found Sisi yet. Not here. Not in these summers at Possenhofen. She rides. She rides well, better than you'd expect from a girl nobody's bothered to train properly, but the family keeps horses and Sisi takes to them with a seriousness she doesn't show for much else. She swims in the cold lake, long strokes out into the grey-green water until someone on shore starts to worry. She fishes. She climbs in the foothills when the weather's good and stays out until somebody comes looking for her. She speaks Bavarian dialect with the local children, proper thick dialect, the kind that would make a courtier flinch, and she has real friendships among the farm families near the estate. The kind where you share food and get mud on your clothes and nobody asks about your bloodline. Nobody curtsies, nobody calls her your Royal Highness. She is just Sisi, the skinny one from the big house, the one who can outswim most of the boys and isn't afraid of the water even when it's cold. Imagine her for a moment in those years. 12, 13, 14. Too thin, people say, not yet grown into herself, all elbows and angles. long, dark blonde hair that she wears in simple braids because it's easier. Light brown eyes with something slightly melancholic in them, though she probably wouldn't have called it that yet. She's quiet around strangers and loud around her siblings, and she writes poetry in a small book that she keeps hidden in her room. She isn't pretty, her mother thinks. Or rather, she's fresh, which is a different thing. She's fresh the way cold water is fresh, the way uncut grass is fresh. But she doesn't have a single beautiful feature, Ludovica writes to a relative, trying to find a husband for her in Saxony. Not one. She comes back from that trip to Dresden without a husband. She stands entirely in the shadow of her older sister Helene, who is everything Sisi is not. More beautiful, better educated, more serious, better mannered. Helene is the one being prepared for something. Helene is the one the family has plans for. Sisi is the one who climbs trees and writes poems nobody reads and slips out before breakfast to go down to the lake. There's a gentleness to these years that I want to hold on to before we leave them behind. The education is thin. Nobody's teaching her protocol or French conversation, or the elaborate art of entering a room correctly. Nobody's preparing her for anything, because nobody expects her to become anything in particular. She's the second daughter from a minor branch of the Wittelsbach family. The Munich court barely knows she exists. She can't even manage the basics of polite grooming. Her teeth, her mother notes with some concern, could use more attention. But she can ride a horse full speed along the lakeshore, and she can swim farther than any of her brothers, and she knows the names of every farming family within walking distance of Posse. And right now, in these last untouched summers, that's enough. There's one more thing about these Possenhofen years that I want to sit with for a moment before we move on. It's small, but it stays with me. In the winter of 1852, when Sisi is 15, she falls in love for the first time. His name is Richard, Count Richard S., the sources say. Someone in her father's household. Not a suitable match, not even close. It's nothing scandalous, nothing dramatic. Just a girl's first real feeling of that warmth, that attention, the quiet sense that someone has noticed you out of all the noise around you. The family ends it immediately. Richard is sent away on some invented errand. He comes back briefly, but he's ill, and he dies not long after. Sisi locks herself in her room. She cries for days. She writes love poems in her small hidden book. The dice have fallen, she writes. Richard is no more. The morning bells ring. She's 15 years old, and she's learning for the first time what it feels like when people who think they know better reach in and take something away from you. Her mother watches all of this and makes a practical decision. What the girl needs is a change of scenery, something to pull her out of this melancholy. And so, when the invitation comes from Aunt Sophie in Austria, bring Helene to Ischl this August, the Emperor would like to meet her, Ludovica decides to bring Sisi along too, not as a candidate. Nobody's thinking of Sisi as a candidate for anything. She's there to fill the carriage and keep the mood light and perhaps, if all goes well, to catch the eye of the Emperor's younger brother Karl Ludwig, with whom she's been exchanging childish letters and small rings for years. Nobody is preparing her for what's about to happen. Nobody's combing her hair the right way or teaching her how to curtsy to an emperor, or telling her which fork to use at a state dinner. She's packed into the luggage of someone else's destiny, and brought along because her mother doesn't know what else to do with her sadness. The lake is quiet this morning. The mist is burning off the surface in long, slow ribbons. Somewhere in the house a door bangs shut. A dog barks once, and one of the younger children is calling out about something that won't matter by lunchtime. In a few weeks they'll pack the trunks and leave for Austria, and everything after that will be different. But right now the water is still and the mountains haven't moved, and the girl with the braids is somewhere between the house and the shore, in no particular hurry to be anywhere at all. Let's talk about the woman who set all of this in motion, because without her there is no story. Archduchess Sophie of Austria, born a Bavarian princess, married into the Habsburg family at 19, and by the time our story begins she is, by most honest accounts, the most powerful woman in Central Europe. People at court call her the only man at the Viennese court, and they don't mean it entirely as a compliment, but they mean it as the truth. Sophie arrived in Vienna in 1824 and walked into a vacuum. The emperor was old. His heir, Ferdinand, was so physically and mentally impaired that he could barely function. The court nickname for him, used behind closed doors but known to everyone, was Ferdinand the Kind, which was the gentlest way of saying he was incapable of ruling. Sophie's own husband, Archduke Franz Karl, was Ferdinand's younger brother, and he was, in Sophie's private estimation, weak in both body and mind. She'd been given, as a husband, a man she'd wept over for nights before the wedding, a man she'd been told she must take because the matter had been decided at the Congress of Vienna. Dynasties didn't ask for feelings. They asked for compliance, so Sophie complied, and then she did what nobody expected. She took the empty space around her and filled it with herself. She became the strategist, the decision-maker, the one who understood that power in this family didn't belong to whoever wore the crown. It belonged to whoever was paying attention. When the revolution of 1848 swept through Vienna and the old order crumbled, it was Sophie who forced Metternich out. It was Sophie who convinced her own husband to give up his place in the line of succession. And it was Sophie who engineered the moment that put her 18-year-old son, Franz Joseph, on the throne in December of that year, at a hastily arranged ceremony in the Moravian town of Olmütz, while the barricades in Vienna were still warm. She loved that boy with an intensity that left room for very little else. What a great blessing it was, she wrote, not to see that good but poor little creature who we had to acknowledge as our emperor for nearly 14 years, wandering about undisturbed any longer, and instead to see the winning appearance of our dear young emperor who delighted everyone. She spoke of her son the way a sculptor might speak of a finished work. She had made him. She had shaped his education, his manners, his sense of duty, his politics, all of it. He was her masterpiece, and she intended to keep polishing. And there's something I keep turning over about Sophie that I think matters for what comes next. She once wrote to Princess Metternich that one should never believe that individualities have any significance. She had always seen that one person was replaced by another, without it making the slightest difference in the world. Think about that for a moment. The woman choosing her son's wife genuinely believed that individual personalities didn't matter. Whether the bride was Helene or Elisabeth or anyone else, as long as she was the right rank, the right religion, the right bloodline, was, in Sophie's view, a detail, an interchangeable part in a dynastic machine. This is the mind that goes shopping for an empress. Her son, the young Emperor Franz Joseph, is 23 years old in the summer of 1853. He's a handsome young man, blonde hair, a soft face, a slim figure that looks striking in the tight-fitting general's uniform he wears almost constantly. The girls of the Viennese aristocracy consider him the most eligible man in Europe, the great catch of the age, and at the winter balls of the high nobility he proves himself a passionate and surprisingly skilled dancer, light on his feet, attentive to his partners, flushed with a warmth he rarely shows behind his desk. The foreign diplomats who meet him are impressed. Bismarck, after an encounter in 1852, wrote that the young emperor gave him a very pleasant impression. The fire of 20 years paired with the dignity and determination of mature age, a fine eye especially when he becomes animated, and a winning expression of openness, particularly when he smiles. And then Bismarck added with characteristic sharpness that if Franz Joseph weren't an emperor, he'd find him a touch too serious for his age. He was serious because he had reason to be. He ruled absolutely. No parliament, no constitution, no prime minister. His ministers were advisors, nothing more. He held his vast, restless empire of 40 million souls together with military force and police power and the sheer weight of ceremony. 8.5 million Germans, 16 million Slavs, 6 million Italians, 5 million Magyars, nearly 3 million Romanians, about 1 million Jews, 100,000 Roma, all held inside one set of borders by the will of one young man who worked at his desk every morning before dawn and answered every letter and read every report and trusted almost nobody except his mother. But the power he wielded came at a cost that showed in small telling ways. Just months before our story begins, in February of 1853, a Hungarian tailor's apprentice named Lebenyi attacked him with a knife during a walk along the city ramparts, stabbing him in the neck and wounding him badly. As he was wrestled to the ground, Lebenyi shouted the name of Kossuth, the Hungarian revolutionary who'd declared a republic 4 years earlier and was now plotting from exile. The young emperor survived, but the message was clear enough. The throne was not as solid as the ceremony made it look. Beneath the gold braid and the protocol and the 15-gun salutes, there were people who wanted him gone. Franz Joseph responded the way Sophie had taught him to respond, with more discipline, more rigidity, more ceremony. He worked harder. He trusted fewer people. He clung to his mother's judgment with the tenacity of a young man who'd been given an empire before he'd had time to figure out who he was without one. He was, in the privacy of his family, a dutiful and affectionate son who brought Sophie every doubt and every small triumph, and waited for her verdict before he felt sure of his own feelings. He had exquisite manners and virtually no experience of ordinary human warmth. He'd never had a conversation with someone who wasn't performing for him. He'd never sat in a room where nobody was watching, and that's the part that matters most. He trusted Sophie. He deferred to her. He brought her his problems and his doubts and his small victories, and she received them all with the absolute certainty of a woman who believed she had earned the right to decide. When it came time to find him a wife, there was never any question about who would make the choice. Sophie's first idea was a Prussian princess. A Habsburg-Hohenzollern marriage would strengthen Austria's position in the German Confederation, which was the great political chess game of the era, Austria trying to hold its ground as the leading German power, while Prussia grew stronger year by year. In the winter of 1852, she sent Franz Joseph to Berlin on a thinly disguised diplomatic visit. He fell in love almost immediately with Princess Anna, a niece of the Prussian king, a girl his own age, pretty, lively, exactly the kind of face that made him light up. But Anna was already engaged. Sophie, undeterred, wrote to her sister Queen Elise asking whether this sad marriage that had been imposed on the girl might somehow be avoided. She was remarkably frank about it. She described how deeply her son's heart had been affected, how this glimpse of happiness had struck him like a fleeting dream and left a mark far deeper than she had first believed. It was no use. The Prussian politicians had no interest in an Austrian match. Prince Wilhelm, the future Kaiser Wilhelm I, commented acidly that Prussia congratulated itself on the fact that Austria had testified to its submission in our capital without our having yielded a single foot of political ground. Franz Joseph swallowed the rejection. Sophie moved to her second option, a Saxon princess Sidney. She was sickly. Franz Joseph didn't find her attractive. That plan died quietly, and so we arrive at Plan C. Sophie's own sister Ludovica had a daughter of marriageable age. Helene was not as prestigious a match as a Prussian or Saxon princess. The ducal Wittelsbachs were a minor branch, without any official function at the Bavarian court. But Bavaria was Austria's most loyal partner in the German Confederation, and another marriage between the two houses would be politically useful. There had already been 21 marriages between Wittelsbachs and Habsburgs over the centuries. One more wouldn't hurt. I keep thinking about how far down the list Helene actually was. Third choice, after a girl who was already engaged to someone else and a girl who was too sick. That's the position from which an entire life was being decided. Not she is the one, but she is the one who's left. And nobody thought this was unusual. This was how it worked. This was how it had always worked. Every one of Sophie's 9 sisters had been married off to a strategic purpose, and every one of them had swallowed whatever heartbreak came with it. Ludovica's romance with her Portuguese prince, Sophie's tears before her own wedding, the Bavarian Queen Mother's famous remark when told that her daughter was crying with dread at the prospect of marrying into Vienna. What do you expect? The matter was decided at the Congress of Vienna. Sophie had managed this trick herself. She'd married a man she didn't choose, watched her hopes for personal happiness close like a door, and redirected every ounce of her energy into the one project that gave her life meaning: her son's reign. She'd nursed the Duke of Reichstadt, Napoleon's son, through his final illness when she was young, and the Viennese gossips had whispered that the dying young man was more than a friend. Whether that was true doesn't matter. What matters is that Sophie, like Ludovica, like every princess of their generation, had learned to take whatever private grief she carried and lock it away in a room where duty couldn't hear it crying. She expected her future daughter-in-law to do the same. She expected compliance, gratitude, and silence. The idea that the bride might have feelings about any of this, feelings that mattered, feelings that couldn't simply be put away, did not occur to her. It wasn't cruelty. It was the only world she knew. 21 marriages between the two houses over the centuries. 21 brides packed into carriages and sent across borders to men they'd barely met, in countries where they didn't speak the local language, to serve a purpose that had nothing to do with love. The machinery was old and well-oiled. It had run for generations without anyone asking whether the parts inside it were happy. These women knew exactly what they were doing to their daughters, because the same thing had been done to them. And they did it anyway, because they couldn't imagine an alternative. The reading of love stories was strictly forbidden in the Bavarian royal household. precisely so that the girls wouldn't get ideas about choosing for themselves. Even the German classics were banned because they contained too much romantic feeling. You raised a princess to understand that she was a piece on a board, and when the time came, you moved her. Sophie set the plan in motion. The young emperor and Helene would meet in Ischl, the imperial family's summer retreat in the Salzkammergut. The setting was deliberate. Ischl was informal, almost cosy by Habsburg standards. A lakeside town in the mountains, far from the rigid protocol of Vienna. The hope was that a relaxed atmosphere would help the shy young man warm to the bride his mother had chosen for him. Ludovica was informed. Her gratitude was enormous and her anxiety even larger. She knew her daughter was not a brilliant match. She knew the Viennese aristocracy would judge Helene harshly. A girl from a family whose father built circuses and whose mother read missionary calendars. She knew Sophie's standards were punishing. Sophie, who had given up the chance to be empress herself in order to put her son on the throne. Sophie, who ran the Habsburg court with the precision of a military campaign. Sophie, who judged weakness the way other people judged dishonesty. Ludovica loved her sister. She also feared her. But she knew that this was the best thing that could ever happen to any of her daughters, and she was not going to let it slip away. The date was set for August 1853. Ludovica would bring Helene to Ischl, and the emperor would meet her, and if all went according to Sophie's careful blueprint, a fourth attempt at finding a bride would finally succeed. But here's what nobody planned for. Ludovica decided, almost as an afterthought, to bring her second daughter along. Sisi was still locked in her grief over Richard's death, still writing sad poems in her hidden book, still retreating into herself. A trip to the mountains might do her good. And there was another reason, a practical one. The emperor's younger brother, Karl Ludwig, was about Sisi's age, and the two had been exchanging letters and little gifts for years. Perhaps something might come of it. A smaller match, a quieter one, but a match all the same. So the invitation expanded. Helene, the serious one, the prepared one, the one everybody had spent months grooming, she would go to meet the emperor, and Sisi, the one nobody was thinking about, the one with the messy braids and the tear-stained poems and the Bavarian accent, she would go along to keep her sister company. The political situation that August was terrible. The Crimean War had erupted. Russian troops had occupied the Danubian principalities. The international balance of power was shifting under everyone's feet. Franz Joseph's advisors were split. Old Field Marshal Radetzky wanted to side with Russia. Foreign Minister Boule was pushing for an alliance with England and France. And the young emperor himself was indecisive, overwhelmed, confiding in his mother that the Oriental complications were growing ever more complex. He needed to focus. He needed to think clearly. Instead, he was about to be distracted by something his mother hadn't planned for and couldn't control. There's a word Sophie used in her letters that I find quietly devastating. She described Helene's qualities to her sister, her intelligence, her bearing, her seriousness. And then she described Sisi, almost in passing, noting the younger girl's grace and charm in all her movements, all the more so because she was so completely unaware of having made such a pleasant impression. Unaware, that's the word. Sophie noticed Sisi before anyone else did. She saw the quality that would undo all her careful planning. Not beauty, not intelligence, not bearing, but the simple fact that Sisi didn't know she was being watched. In a world of people performing for each other, the girl who wasn't performing was the one you couldn't look away from. Nobody told Sisi any of this. Nobody warned her. On the 16th of August, 1853, she climbed into a carriage beside her mother and her sister, wearing a black mourning dress because a relative had died, and the trunk with the nice clothes hadn't arrived yet, and she set off for the Austrian Alps without the faintest idea that the next 3 days would dismantle everything she knew about her own life. Ludovica had a migraine on the road. They arrived late. They arrived without luggage and without ladies' maids. Sophie's first reaction was irritation. The schedule was ruined. Her second reaction, when she finally laid eyes on the two girls standing in their dusty black travelling clothes in the hotel lobby, was something else entirely. But that's for the next part of our story. For now, let's just stay here for a moment. In the carriage, on the road, with the mountains getting closer. Helene is sitting up straight, rehearsing in her mind the things she's been taught to say. Ludovica is pressing a damp cloth to her forehead and worrying about everything. And Sisi is looking out the window at the passing countryside, thinking about nothing in particular, watching the light move across the hills, She doesn't know yet. None of them do. Picture a small Austrian town in the mountains, in the middle of August. Ischl sits in a valley where the Traun and the Ischl rivers meet, surrounded by the kind of alpine scenery that looks almost too perfect to be real. Sharp peaks, dark pine forests, meadows so green they seem to vibrate in the afternoon light. The town itself is modest. A few hotels, a handful of shops, a parish church with a square bell tower, narrow streets that smell of wood smoke and fresh bread, and, faintly, of the salt that gave the region its old name, the Salzkammergut, the salt chamber. People have been pulling salt from these mountains for centuries, and the wealth it generated built the little villas and guest houses that line the riverbanks. But every August, Ischl becomes something else. The imperial family comes to stay, and with them comes the court, or at least a travelling version of it, lighter and less formal than Vienna, but still unmistakably Habsburg. Officers in uniform walk along the river promenade. Carriages with gold-trimmed doors roll through the narrow streets. The local shopkeepers put out their best displays, and the innkeepers raise their prices, and the whole town arranges itself around the presence of the young emperor, the way a garden arranges itself around a sundial. Everything points toward him. The emperor's presence turns ordinary things into events. A walk along the esplanade becomes a procession. A visit to the salt mines becomes a state occasion. Even the konditorei, where Franz Josef sometimes stops for coffee, takes on a ceremonial quality. The owner puts out his best porcelain, the waiters stand a little straighter, and the other guests pretend not to stare while staring with everything they have. The whole performance runs on a fuel of elaborate casualness. Everyone acts as though this is perfectly normal. Just a family on holiday, just a young man enjoying the mountains. Nobody mentions the adjutants hovering 3 paces behind him at all times, or the security concerns that mean every path he walks has been checked in advance, or the dispatch riders who arrive from Vienna every morning before dawn, with leather pouches full of state business that can't wait. Franz Josef loves Ischl. It's the closest thing he has to a private life. Hunting in the mountains, walking by the river, eating dinner with his mother without the full weight of Viennese protocol pressing down on every fork and napkin. He's been coming here since childhood, and the rhythms of the place are in his bones. The crack of a rifle in the early morning, the smell of pine resin warming in the sun, the way the light falls across the valley in the late afternoon, turning everything gold for about 20 minutes before the shadows swallow it. It's into this setting, on the 16th of August, 1853, that a carriage pulls up carrying 3 women in black. They're late. They were supposed to arrive that morning, but Ludovica's migraine held them up on the road, and now it's well past noon, and the schedule Sophie had arranged so carefully is in ruins. The luggage wagon, travelling separately, hasn't arrived at all. Somewhere between Munich and the Austrian border, the trunk containing the good dresses, the ones Ludovica had agonised over, the ones Helene was supposed to wear to make her first impression, is sitting in a customs depot or a muddy courtyard or the back of a delayed coach. It doesn't matter where. It isn't here. The journey from Munich to Ischl should take about a day under good conditions. South through the Bavarian countryside, across the Austrian border at Salzburg, then east through the Lake District into the Salzkammergut. It's pretty country, rolling and green, and in August the roadsides are thick with wildflowers and the air smells like cut hay. But Ludovica's migraine turns the trip into an ordeal. Every jolt of the carriage sends a spike through her temples. She needs to stop. She needs to rest. She needs cold compresses and dark rooms and quiet, and none of these things are available on a post road in the Austrian countryside with an imperial appointment waiting at the other end. Helene sits beside her mother and worries. Sisi sits across from them and watches the landscape and tries not to make too much noise. The carriage smells like leather and dust and Ludovica's lavender water, and the road goes on, and the mountains get closer with every hour. What is here? 3 women in heavy black mourning dresses, because a relative, Ludovica's half-sister, has recently died, and court protocol demands visible grief. The dresses are wool, because mourning dresses in this era are always wool, dark, thick, unadorned, designed to show sorrow through the complete absence of ornament. No ribbons, no lace, no colour of any kind. Helene's dress is dark and plain, and buttoned to the throat. Sisi's dress is dark and plain, and slightly too warm for August in the mountains. Ludovica's dress is dark and plain and wrinkled from 2 days of travel, and her head is splitting, and she can feel the fabric sticking to her back with perspiration, and she knows, with the particular clarity that comes with a migraine, that everything is going wrong. This is the first impression they're about to make on the most powerful family in Europe. 3 women in funeral clothes, without luggage, without servants, arriving hours late, smelling faintly of road dust and closed carriages. Ludovica wants to weep with frustration. She has spent months imagining this moment, and in none of those imaginings did it look like this. They have no ladies' maids with them. This is unusual. Aristocratic women of this era don't travel without personal attendants. You need someone to dress you, to arrange your hair, to press your clothes, to handle the 100 small physical preparations that make up the armour of respectability. But the maids are with the luggage, or they weren't brought, or something went wrong with the arrangements. The sources are vague on exactly why. What matters is the result. Ludovica and her 2 daughters arrive at their hotel in Ischl looking like they've just come from a funeral, which they haven't, and like they've dressed themselves, which they have. Sophie is already at Ischl with Franz Josef. She's been here for days preparing. When she hears that her sister has arrived, late, in black, without proper attendance, her first reaction is controlled irritation. She sends one of her own ladies-in-waiting to help the girls get ready for the afternoon tea, where the young emperor will meet them for the first time. And here is where the small details start to matter, in ways that nobody understands yet. The borrowed maid focuses on Helene. Of course she does. Helene is the reason they're here. Helene is the candidate. The maid works on Helene's hair. Dark hair, thick and heavy, arranged into an elaborate style that frames her face and shows off her high forehead, which was considered a mark of intelligence and breeding. Helene is coiffed and pinned and smoothed until she looks like what she's supposed to be. A serious young woman of good family, ready to be presented to an emperor. Sisi does her own hair. She parts it down the middle and braids it into 2 simple plaits, the way she always does. The way she's been doing since she was old enough to hold a comb. The braids are long. Her hair reaches past her waist already, dark blonde with a reddish tint that catches the light when it moves. She ties them off with plain ribbons. It takes her a few minutes. She doesn't think much about it. She's 15, and she's never had a reason to believe that how she wears her hair could change the course of anything. In 20 years, this same hair will become legendary. The most famous head of hair in Europe, a cascade that takes 3 hours to wash and an entire afternoon to dry, maintained with a regimen that borders on obsession. But right now it's just hair. Just 2 braids in a mirror, done quickly, done alone. I keep coming back to this moment. 2 sisters in the same hotel room, one being carefully prepared for the most important meeting of her life, the other braiding her own hair in the corner. It's so ordinary, so quiet. And it's the hinge on which everything turns. Because what nobody in that room understands is that the elaborate hairstyle, the careful preparation, the polished presentation, all of it is working against Helene. Franz Josef doesn't want polished. He doesn't want prepared. He's surrounded by polished and prepared people every hour of every day. What he wants, though he doesn't know it yet, is something he's never seen before. Something unguarded. The afternoon tea takes place in Sophie's apartments. The room is comfortable but formal. Good furniture, fresh flowers, the particular quality of light that comes through tall windows in an alpine valley. Everyone knows what's happening. Everyone knows the stakes. The adults have been talking about this meeting for months, and now here it is, and the tension in the room is the kind you can feel on your skin, like the air before a thunderstorm. Franz Josef enters. He's in uniform, as always. The white tunic of a general, brass buttons, a sword at his side. He's 23. He has the posture of a man who's been taught to stand straight since before he could walk. His face is pleasant and open, with light blue eyes and the beginnings of the side whiskers he'll wear for the rest of his life. He greets his Aunt Ludovica. He greets Helene with proper courtesy, a slight bow, the correct words, the careful attention of a young man who knows he's supposed to be evaluating this girl. And then he sees Sisi. She's standing slightly behind her sister, slightly to the side, in her plain black dress with her 2 simple braids. She's thin. Her eyes are large. She's looking at the floor, or at the window, or anywhere that isn't directly at the most powerful young man in Europe. She isn't trying to be noticed. She isn't trying to be anything. Franz Josef's younger brother, Karl Ludwig, is in the room. He's the one who's been writing letters to Sisi, exchanging small presents, carrying on the kind of innocent correspondence that royal families encouraged between cousins as a way of keeping future options open. He knows Sisi, at least on paper, and he watches his older brother's face at the moment Franz Josef first looks at her. What he sees there, he later reports, is an expression of such great satisfaction that it's impossible to miss. That phrase is remarkable if you think about it. Not excitement, not surprise, not desire, satisfaction. As if something Franz Josef had been looking for without knowing it had suddenly appeared in front of him, and the feeling that flooded through him wasn't the thrill of discovery but the relief of recognition. There she is. Finally. Sisi can't eat. The table is set with cakes and pastries and tea, and she sits there unable to touch any of it, because the room is too full of people and too full of attention, and everything feels wrong. She's shy under the best of circumstances, and these are not the best of circumstances. Her mother is tense. Her sister is performing. Her Aunt Sophie is watching with the focused intensity of a woman who's evaluating breeding stock. And the young emperor keeps glancing at Sisi with an attention that is plainly visible to everyone in the room but her. She doesn't see it because she isn't looking. She's looking at her own hands, or at the pattern on the tablecloth, or at a point somewhere in the middle distance where nobody is asking anything of her. She has never been in a room like this. She has never been around people who carry themselves with this kind of deliberate composure, where every gesture means something, and every silence is a calculation. At Possenhofen, the silences are just silences. Here they feel like they're full of furniture. There's something about shyness in a situation like this that I think we underestimate. We tend to read it as weakness, as a disadvantage. But in that room, surrounded by people who've spent their whole lives learning how to present themselves, Sisi's shyness is the most honest thing happening. She can't pretend. She can't perform. She doesn't have the training for it, and she doesn't have the temperament for it. And so she just sits there, being exactly and entirely herself, uncomfortable, overwhelmed, and completely transparent. In a room full of masks, she's the only face, and that face, unguarded, uncertain, slightly flushed from the heat of the black wool dress, is the most interesting thing Franz Josef has seen in months, maybe years, maybe ever. Franz Josef can't stop looking at her. The tea drags on. Helene says the right things in the right order. Ludovica watches her older daughter with anxious hope, and her younger daughter with mounting unease. She's beginning to suspect that something is happening that wasn't supposed to happen. Sophie notices too. Sophie notices everything. She watches her nephew's eyes track across the room to the younger girl, the one who wasn't even supposed to be here, the one with the simple braids and the black dress and the inability to eat a piece of cake in public. Sophie files this observation away. She doesn't panic. Sophie never panics. But she begins, very quietly, to recalculate. Queen Elise of Prussia is also present. Sophie's sister, another piece on the Wittelsbach chessboard, married off to Friedrich Wilhelm IV years ago. She's older now, watchful, experienced in reading the currents of dynastic gatherings, and she sees what Sophie sees. She writes in her own correspondence that evening, with the frankness of a woman who has no personal stake in the outcome, that the young emperor has caught fire, not for Helene, for the other one, the quiet one. It's Elise who sends the first clear signal back through the family network. By nightfall, the Wittelsbach aunts and cousins scattered across half a dozen European courts will begin to hear, through the efficient postal channels of royal gossip, that something unexpected has happened at Ischl. The wrong girl. The emperor wants the wrong girl. After the tea, Franz Josef goes out for a walk. He doesn't go hunting, which is what he usually does in the afternoons at Ischl. He stays close to the hotel. He paces. He's restless in a way his staff hasn't seen before. The young man who rises at 4 every morning to work at his desk, who processes state papers with the mechanical efficiency of a well-maintained clock, who has survived an assassination attempt and a revolution, and the loneliness of absolute power with barely a visible crack in his composure, that young man is pacing along a riverbank in the Austrian Alps because a 15-year-old girl with braids couldn't eat her cake. The evening comes slowly, the way August evenings do in the mountains. The light lingers on the highest peaks long after the valley has gone to shadow. The mountains turn purple, then slate, then dark. The river catches the last of the sky and holds it for a while. The town quiets down. Somewhere in the hotel, Helene is reviewing the day with her mother, trying to gauge whether she made the right impression, whether the Emperor seemed pleased, whether Sophie's expression was approving or merely polite. These are the questions that matter to her. These are the questions her whole life has been leading to. And somewhere else in the hotel, in a smaller room, Sisi is sitting on the edge of her bed, probably still in her black dress, probably still unable to eat, thinking about what? We don't know. The sources don't tell us what Sisi thought that first evening. She didn't write about it. Or if she did, it hasn't survived. Maybe she was thinking about the mountains. Maybe she was thinking about the strange intensity in her cousin's eyes. Maybe she was thinking about Richard, about the lake at Possenhofen, about all the places she'd rather be than this stiff little town where everyone seems to be watching everyone else. What I do know is this. She went to bed that night as the same person she'd been that morning. The second daughter, the one nobody planned for, the girl with the braids, and when she woke up the next day the world was already tilting. The night settles over Ischl like a held breath. The river murmurs below the hotel windows. The mountains are darker shapes against a dark sky, and the first stars are coming out over the Salzkammergut. And somewhere in this small town, two young people are lying awake thinking about each other, though neither of them would quite put it that way yet. Tomorrow is the Emperor's birthday. There will be a ball. The 17th of August begins early for Sophie. She's an early riser, always has been, and the habits of power don't soften in the mountains. She's at her writing desk before the light is fully up, working through correspondence, making notes, thinking ahead. The agenda for the day is clear. Helene and the Emperor will spend more time together. The impression from yesterday's tea was, well, it was complicated, but Sophie is a woman who manages complications. She'll steer things, she always does, and then her son walks in. Franz Joseph is not a man who bursts into rooms. He's been trained since infancy to move with measured deliberation, to knock, to wait, to enter with the correct posture and the appropriate greeting. But this morning he comes to his mother's apartments with a kind of urgency she hasn't seen in him before. And the first thing he says, the very first thing, before he sits down, before he takes a breath, is about Sisi. How sweet Sisi is, he tells his mother. She's as fresh as a budding almond, and what a splendid crown of hair frames her face. What lovely soft eyes she has, and lips like strawberries. There it is. Not Helene made a pleasant impression. Not, I found our guest intelligent and well-mannered. But a rush of physical description, hair, eyes, lips, delivered with the breathless enthusiasm of a young man who's been struck by something he wasn't expecting and doesn't know how to contain. Sophia spent 23 years reading her son's face, and she knows instantly that this is not a passing fancy. This is trouble. She tries to redirect. Don't you find Helene beautiful? She asks. And then more pointedly, don't you notice how clever she is? Franz Joseph barely responds. He isn't interested in Helene's cleverness. He isn't interested in Helene at all. He's interested in the girl with the braids who couldn't eat her cake, and no amount of maternal steering is going to change that. I keep thinking about Sophie in this moment. The chess master watching her carefully constructed game fall apart because of a variable she hadn't accounted for. She'd planned for everything. She'd considered rank and religion and bloodline and political advantage. She'd evaluated Helene's intelligence, her bearing, her suitability for public life. The one thing she hadn't planned for was the possibility that her son might simply fall in love with someone else. It hadn't occurred to her that feelings could override strategy, because in Sophie's experience they never had. She'd married a man she didn't choose. Her sisters had married men they didn't choose. Every woman in her family for generations had set aside her personal feelings and done what the dynasty required. The idea that her son, her carefully trained, perfectly obedient son, might refuse to do the same was, for Sophie, genuinely incomprehensible. But here he is, sitting in her apartment at 7 a.m, talking about strawberry lips. Sophie doesn't argue, she doesn't forbid. That's not how she operates. She makes a note in her diary. She keeps meticulous diaries, and she waits. Perhaps it will pass. Young men are impressionable. A pretty face at a tea party doesn't have to mean anything. There's still time to guide him back to the correct choice. The morning unfolds. Franz Joseph is supposed to go hunting. Chamois hunting in the high mountains above Ischl, which is his greatest pleasure. the one activity that makes him look like something other than a bureaucrat in a uniform. His adjutants prepare the rifles. The guides are ready. The weather is perfect for it, clear and cool, with the kind of sharp alpine light that makes the peaks look close enough to touch. He doesn't go. He cancels the hunt. This is, by the standards of Franz Joseph's tightly regulated life, the equivalent of an earthquake. He never cancels hunts. The hunt is sacred. It's the one space where he gets to be a body in motion instead of a mind behind a desk. The court knows this. The adjutants know this. And when the word spreads through the hotel that the emperor has declined to go into the mountains today, everyone who understands the language of imperial behaviour knows exactly what it means. Something is keeping him here. Someone. He spends the day near the hotel, finding excuses to be in places where he might cross paths with his Bavarian guests. A walk along the river, a visit to his mother's apartments, a stroll through the hotel garden. Each encounter is brief and carefully casual. The Emperor of Austria can't exactly loiter in a hotel corridor hoping to bump into a 15-year-old girl, but the pattern is unmistakable. He's orbiting. Ludovica sees this. She's not a subtle reader of political situations. Her sister Sophie has always been the sharp one. But she's a mother, and mothers notice when a young man keeps finding reasons to be near one of their daughters. The question is, which daughter? The answer, which Ludovica begins to suspect with growing alarm, is not the one she brought here for this purpose. She writes a hasty note to her husband Max back in Bavaria. Not quite panic, but something close to it. The situation is developing in a direction she hadn't anticipated, and she doesn't have Sophie's gift for managing the unexpected. Sisi, meanwhile, is largely oblivious. She's enjoying Ischl in the way a girl from Possenhofen would enjoy it. The mountains are beautiful, the air is cleaner than Munich, there are walks to take and things to look at. She's aware that her cousin the Emperor is around, and she finds him pleasant, and she's flattered by his attention in the vague, unexamined way that a 15-year-old is flattered by any attention from an older boy. But she isn't thinking strategically. She isn't thinking at all in the way that Sophie and Ludovica and Elaine are thinking. She's just here. She's just being herself, which is, of course, exactly the problem. Queen Elise watches all of this with the clear-eyed detachment of a woman who's been through enough dynastic dramas to recognise the signs. She pulls Sophie aside at some point during the day and delivers her verdict with characteristic bluntness. "Take care," she says, "he's caught fire." Hat Feuer gefangen. The phrase has a particular weight in German. It suggests something uncontrollable, something that's already past the point where you can stamp it out. Sophie hears this and says nothing. Or rather, she says the things she's supposed to say, that it's early, that nothing has been decided, that the Emperor will of course consider his duties. But behind the diplomatic words she's recalculating furiously. If Franz Joseph truly won't accept Helene, then the question becomes whether Sisi is an acceptable alternative. Same family, same bloodline, same religion. Younger, less polished, completely untrained for public life. But still a Wittelsbach, still Catholic, still politically useful. The machine can be adjusted. The machine can always be adjusted. The question is whether Sophie can tolerate a daughter-in-law she didn't choose. And here's the thing about Sophie that makes this moment so interesting. She's a pragmatist. She's not sentimental about Helene. She doesn't love Helene the way she loves her own sons. Helene is a tool, a solution to a problem. If the tool doesn't fit, you find another one. Sophie's loyalty is to the dynasty, not to her niece's feelings. If Franz Joseph truly wants Sisi, and if Sisi can be shaped into something usable, then Sophie will pivot. She'll swallow her irritation and call it duty and move forward. She's done harder things than this. She's given up her own claim to power, twice, for the sake of her son's reign. Accepting the wrong niece is nothing compared to that. But she doesn't like it. She doesn't like it one bit, and she will remember this moment, the moment her son chose feeling over strategy, for the rest of her life. The evening arrives, and with it the ball. It's the eve of Franz Joseph's 23rd birthday, and the ball is held in the main hall of the Hotel Austria, not a grand Viennese ballroom, but a respectable provincial space decorated with flowers and garlands, and lit by more candles than the room usually holds. The Ischl locals press against the windows outside, hoping for a glimpse. Inside, the cream of the summer court is assembled. Military officers in dress uniforms, ladies in silk. The peculiar mixture of formality and alpine informality that characterises everything about Ischl in August. Helene enters in a white silk dress with a wreath of ivy leaves set carefully across her forehead. She looks elegant. She looks prepared. She looks like a woman who's been dressed by professionals with a specific purpose in mind: to be seen, to be admired, to be chosen. The ivy wreath is a classical touch, suggesting wisdom and constancy. Everything about her appearance has been thought through. Sisi enters in something simpler. The sources disagree on exactly what she's wearing. One account says pink, another says a light party dress suitable for a girl her age. What they agree on is that it isn't elaborate, it isn't strategic, it's just a dress, put on without calculation, worn without awareness of its effect. And here's the thing about that evening that gets me. Helene does everything right. She dances with grace, she converses with intelligence, she carries herself with exactly the kind of dignified composure that Sophie has been hoping for. If this were a job interview, and in a sense that's exactly what it is, Helene would pass with distinction. She has studied for this. She is prepared. She is, by every objective measure, the better candidate. It doesn't matter. Franz Joseph dances. He dances well. He always has. It's one of the few physical pleasures he allows himself. And he dances with several partners, as protocol requires. But everyone in the room notices where his eyes go between dances. Everyone notices who he watches when he thinks he's being discreet. There's a particular quality to being watched without knowing it that changes everything about a person. Sisi moves through that ballroom with the unself-conscious grace of someone who doesn't realise she's on stage. Her posture isn't practiced, it's natural. Her smile, when it comes, isn't calculated. It's involuntary, brought on by the music or a stumble in the dance figures or something her partner says that amuses her. She laughs once, softly, at something Weckbecker whispers during a turn, and the laugh is the kind that comes from genuine surprise, not performance. It's the least imperial sound in the room, and it carries. The adjutants notice. The ladies-in-waiting notice. The visiting Bavarian relatives notice. Helene, standing near the edge of the floor in her ivy crown, notices too. A young officer named Weckbecker asks Sisi to dance. She accepts. She can hardly refuse. And they move through the figures together, and Weckbecker, who is perceptive and socially astute, feels the Emperor's attention on them like a physical weight. After the dance, he turns to a companion and says, quietly, but not quietly enough, "I believe I just danced with our future Empress." The words travel through the room the way words always travel through rooms at occasions like this. Quickly, in whispers, gathering energy as they go. By the end of the evening, half the guests have heard some version of it. The other half have drawn the same conclusion on their own. And then comes the moment of the cotillion. The cotillion is the last formal dance of the evening, a complicated group dance with set figures, and crucially a tradition of exchanging flowers. Each gentleman receives a bouquet to present to the lady of his choice. It's a coded language, flowers at a ball. Everyone understands what it means when a young man gives his bouquet to a particular young woman. It's a public declaration, barely disguised as a game. Franz Joseph has flowers. More than one bouquet as it happens. The Emperor receives extras because he's the Emperor, and he gives them to Sisi, all of them. Sisi takes them. She holds them in her hands, these flowers from the most powerful young man in Europe, and she doesn't understand what's happening. She genuinely doesn't understand. She's 15. She's never been to a ball before, or if she has, it was nothing like this. She doesn't know the code. She doesn't know that every pair of eyes in the room is watching her hold those flowers. She thinks he's being nice. She thinks this is what people do at parties. There's something almost unbearable about this, if you sit with it long enough. A young man trying to tell a girl he's falling in love with her, using the only language his world allows. Flowers, dances, glances across a room, and the girl doesn't speak that language. She doesn't know she's being chosen. She's standing in the middle of the most significant moment of her life so far, holding an armful of flowers, and she has no idea. Helene knows. Helene understands the cotillion code perfectly. She's been trained to understand it. And standing there in her white silk dress with her ivy wreath, watching her younger sister receive the Emperor's flowers, all of them, every single one. She feels the ground shift under her feet. The thing she'd been promised. The thing she'd spent months preparing for. The future that had been laid out for her like a road. It's being given to someone else. To her little sister, who doesn't even realise she's receiving it. The ball winds down. The candles gutter in their holders. The musicians pack their instruments. The guests drift toward the doors in clusters, speaking softly, some of them glancing at Sisi as they pass. The air smells of melted wax and warm flowers, and the particular sweetness of a summer night in the mountains. Ludovica takes her daughters back to their rooms. Her migraine has returned, or perhaps it never left. She's seen everything that happened tonight, and she doesn't know what to do with any of it. The plan was Helene. The plan was always Helene, but the young man with the crown didn't look at Helene once, not the way he looked at Sisi, not with that helpless, transparent, entirely unimperial hunger. In their shared room, Helene is quiet. Sisi is holding the flowers, the dried remnants of the cotillion bouquets, already beginning to wilt in the warm night air. She'll press some of them later, into that small book where she keeps her poems. She doesn't know yet what they mean. She doesn't know that tomorrow morning the Emperor will go to his mother and tell her, with a firmness he's never shown before, that he has made his choice. There's a detail from this evening that the histories tend to skip over, and I think it deserves a moment. Somewhere during the ball, between the formal dances and the cotillion, Franz Joseph approaches Sisi and they speak. Not long, a few minutes, perhaps less. The conversation is trivial by any measure. He asks her about Bavaria. She answers shyly in short sentences. He asks whether she's enjoying Ischl. She says yes, the mountains are beautiful, that's it. That's the whole exchange, as far as anyone recorded it. But think about what's happening underneath those ordinary words. A young man who commands armies and signs treaties and receives ambassadors and decides the fate of provinces. That young man is standing in front of a girl who can barely look at him, trying to have a normal conversation, and he can't do it. He doesn't know how. Every conversation he's ever had has been structured by rank and protocol. Every person who's ever spoken to him has been performing for him, and now here's this girl who isn't performing at all, who's just nervous and honest and slightly overwhelmed, and he finds that he wants to keep talking to her, more than he's wanted anything in a very long time. The flowers are just flowers to her, pretty, slightly crushed, smelling faintly of the ballroom. Tomorrow everything changes, but tonight the mountains are still, and the rivers are still running, and a girl is falling asleep with an armful of flowers she doesn't know the meaning of. The 18th of August, 1853, the Emperor's birthday. Franz Joseph is 23 years old today, and he wakes before dawn the way he always does. But this morning he doesn't go to his desk. This morning he goes to his mother. What he tells her is simple. He wants Sisi, not Helene. Sisi. He says it plainly, without diplomacy, without the careful hedging that usually characterizes his speech. He uses a phrase that Sophie records in her diary, a phrase that reveals more about the young man's character than any diplomatic dispatch ever could. He asks his mother to approach Ludovica and find out whether she would have me. Whether she would have me. Not whether the match can be arranged. Not whether the political considerations are favourable. Whether she would have me. As though he were a shopkeeper's son asking permission to court the girl next door instead of the absolute ruler of the largest empire in continental Europe. As though the answer might actually be no. Sophie listens. She's had the night to process what she saw at the ball, and she's made her peace with it. Or at least her version of peace, which is the cold, efficient peace of a strategist who's lost a battle but not a war. The girl is a Wittelsbach. The girl is Catholic. The girl is young enough to be shaped. These are the facts that matter. Everything else, the lack of training, the shyness, the Bavarian dialect, the teeth that need attention, these are problems, not obstacles. Problems can be fixed. Sophie has been fixing problems her whole life. She agrees to speak with Ludovica, but first, there's a birthday to get through. The day unfolds with the careful choreography of an imperial occasion. There are congratulations to receive, gifts to acknowledge, a special church service to attend. Franz Joseph goes through the motions with the mechanical competence of a man who's been performing ceremony since he was old enough to stand upright. But everyone who knows him can see that he's distracted. His eyes keep drifting. His attention keeps sliding toward the same point in the room, the way a compass needle keeps swinging north. In the afternoon, Sophie arranges a family excursion, a carriage ride to the village of St. Wolfgang on the shores of the Wolfgangsee. It's a beautiful drive, winding through pine forests and past mountain meadows, and the purpose is at least partly to give the young people more time together in a relaxed setting. The carriage is open, the August air is warm, the mountains rise on either side of the road like the walls of a cathedral. and the light comes down through the trees in long diagonal shafts that make the dust motes look like gold. Sophie and Ludovica sit facing each other. The Emperor and the two girls are there too, Franz Josef stealing glances at Sisi, Helene sitting very straight and trying not to see what everyone can see. Sisi looking at the landscape with the quiet absorption of a girl who'd rather be walking than riding. The carriage smells of leather and warm pine and the faint sweetness of wild clover from the meadows. Nobody talks about what's happening, everybody knows. There's a particular kind of silence that fills a small space when several people are all thinking about the same thing, and none of them are saying it. It has a texture, that's silence. Dense and slightly warm like the air before rain. Helene sits in it and holds herself very still. She has her pride, and her pride is all she has left in this moment, and she carries it the way you'd carry a glass of water across a room full of people, carefully with your eyes fixed ahead, trying not to let it spill. She must already sense what's coming. She must feel it in the way Franz Josef's attention keeps drifting past her. The way his questions to her are polite but thin, the way his questions to her sister have a different quality entirely. Warmer, more searching, as if he's trying to learn something he can't get from anyone else. I think about Helene in this carriage more than I probably should. She's the one this story doesn't follow. She's the one who came here prepared, who did everything right, who wore the ivy crown and danced the correct dances and said the intelligent things. And none of it mattered. The machinery chose someone else. Not because Helene was lacking, but because the Emperor's heart turned in a direction nobody had planned for. She'll go home to Possenhofen after this. She'll eventually marry a minor Italian prince and live a quiet life far from the spotlight that should have been hers. History will remember her only as the sister who wasn't chosen, a footnote in someone else's fairy tale. That seems unfair. It is unfair. But nobody in this carriage is thinking about fairness. They're thinking about the crown. It's during this outing, or shortly after it, that Franz Josef makes his formal request. He asks Sophie to go to Ludovica, not to announce his decision, but to ask. The distinction matters to him. He wants to know whether Sisi is willing, not simply whether the arrangement can be made. There's a tenderness in this that sits oddly with the absolute power he wields in every other area of his life. He can dissolve parliaments and mobilise armies, and sentence men to prison with a stroke of his pen, but he can't bring himself to assume that a 15-year-old girl wants to marry him. He needs to hear it from her. Sophie goes to her sister that evening. The conversation between the two women is not recorded in detail, but the outlines are clear from their separate diary entries. Sophie explains that Franz Josef has chosen, not Helene, but Elisabeth. Ludovica's reaction is a mixture of shock, confusion, and something that might be relief, because Sisi is her daughter too, and an empress is an empress, and the Wittelsbach family's position will be secured regardless of which sister wears the crown. But there's also fear. Ludovica knows her younger daughter in a way that Sophie doesn't. She knows that Sisi is unprepared, untrained, temperamentally unsuited for the life that's about to swallow her. She knows that this girl, who cries when she's forced to leave Possenhofen, who writes sad poems about dead lovers, who can't eat in front of strangers, this girl is about to be placed at the centre of the most rigid, most demanding, most suffocatingly formal court in Europe. And Ludovica can see, with the clarity of a woman who's been unhappy in her own marriage for 25 years, exactly how this might go wrong. But what can she do? What can any of them do? There's a phrase that echoes through this entire story, and Ludovica may have been the one to say it first, though it's been attributed to several people. Einem Kaiser von Österreich gibt man keinen Korb. You don't refuse the Emperor of Austria. You don't give him a basket, as the German idiom puts it. You don't turn him down. It's not done. It has never been done. The weight of centuries of dynastic obligation sits behind those words like a wall, and no single woman's feelings are heavy enough to push through it. Ludovica goes to Sisi, and now we're in the room where the question is asked, and I want to stay here for a moment, because this is one of those places where the sources give us just enough to see the shape of what happened, but not enough to feel the texture of it. We know what Sisi said. We don't know how she said it, or what her face looked like when she heard the question, or whether she cried, or whether she was silent for a long time before she spoke. What she said was this: how could one not love him? If only he weren't an emperor. Wie soll man den Mann nicht lieben können? Wenn nur kein Kaiser wäre? Read it again slowly. She doesn't say, "I love him." She says, "How could one not love him?" A deflection, a generalization, as if she's describing a feeling that anyone would have, not confessing her own heart. And then the qualification, immediate and instinctive, "If only he weren't an emperor." Not, "I wish he were richer," or "I wish he were more handsome," or "I wish he lived closer." She wishes he were less. She wishes he were smaller, more ordinary, more reachable. She's 15 years old, and she already understands, with an intuition that bypasses all the training she never received, that the crown is the problem, not the man. The crown. I keep turning this sentence over in my mind, the way you'd turn a stone in your hand. It's one of the most honest things anyone says in this entire story. Most people, faced with the prospect of becoming Empress of Austria at 15, would either accept with joy or refuse with terror. Sisi does neither. She says yes to the man and no to the title in the same breath, knowing perfectly well that you can't separate them. It's the first sign of a conflict that will define her entire life, the gap between what she feels and what the world requires of her. But the answer is yes. However qualified, however anxious, however instinctively she senses the trap, the answer is yes, because you don't refuse the Emperor of Austria, because her mother is watching, because the machinery is already in motion and has been in motion for centuries, and one girl's ambivalence isn't going to stop it. The next morning, August 19th, the engagement is made official. The family walks to the parish church of Ischl for a brief private ceremony. It's not a wedding, that will come later, in Vienna, with all the pomp the empire can muster. This is just the formal declaration, the moment where the thing that everyone already knows becomes the thing that everyone is told. The priest who performs the blessing is overcome. He weeps through the ceremony. Franz Joseph stands beside Sisi and introduces her to the assembled family with words that are, for him, extraordinarily vulnerable. "Please bless us. This is my fiancée." He doesn't say her full title. He doesn't invoke the dynasty or the state or the strategic implications. He says my fiancée and asks for a blessing, as though they were a young couple in any village church anywhere in Bavaria. Sisi stands beside him in the church and she's trembling. Not with joy exactly, though there may be joy in it, but with the enormity of what's happening to her. 2 days ago she was braiding her own hair in a hotel room. Now she's engaged to the Emperor. The shift is so sudden, so complete, so impossible to absorb that her body responds before her mind can catch up. She shakes. She can barely hold still. The priest's tears don't help. Outside the church, the news spreads through Ischl like water through a cracked dam. By afternoon, the entire town knows. By evening, the telegraphs are carrying the announcement across the empire, to Vienna, to Budapest, to Prague, to Venice, to every provincial capital and military garrison and diplomatic outpost in the vast Habsburg dominion. The emperor has chosen a bride. She's a Bavarian duchess, 15 years old, and nobody outside her immediate family has ever heard of her. The reactions, when they come, are mixed. The Viennese aristocracy is bewildered. Who is this girl? The foreign courts are curious. The newspapers scramble for information and find almost nothing. There's no portrait to publish, no biography to summarise, no list of accomplishments to recite. Elisabeth of Bavaria is a blank page, and everyone projects onto her whatever they want to see. The romantics see a fairy tale, the strategists see an opportunity, the cynics see a girl who is about to be eaten alive. Franz Joseph writes to his mother's lady-in-waiting that evening with the unguarded enthusiasm of a young man in love. "I am beside myself with joy. Sisi is so beautiful. I love her so much. What a lucky man I am." The spelling is slightly off. The grammar is informal. It reads like a note passed in a schoolroom, not like the correspondence of an emperor. He can't contain himself. For perhaps the first and last time in his adult life, he's not performing. He's just happy. That evening Ischl is illuminated. Thousands of candles and oil lamps are placed in windows, on balconies, along the river promenade. The mountains above the town are lit with bonfires arranged to spell out the intertwined initials FJ and E, vast letters of fire burning against the dark alpine sky. The whole valley glows. The reflections shimmer on the surface of the rivers, doubling the light, and from a distance the little town looks like a handful of stars scattered at the bottom of a bowl of mountains. Franz Josef takes Sisi for a walk through the illuminated streets. The crowds cheer. People press forward to see her. She hasn't been presented to the public yet. No official portrait exists, no description has been published, and the curiosity is intense. Who is this girl? What does she look like? Is she worthy? Sisi walks beside the Emperor, overwhelmed, trying to smile, trying to respond to the shouts and the waving, and she doesn't know what to do with any of it. The attention is physical, almost aggressive. She's never been looked at by more than a handful of people at a time. Now thousands are looking. There's a detail from that evening that I want to hold on to. At some point during the walk, or perhaps back at the hotel afterward, Franz Josef gives Sisi an engagement present. A brooch set with diamonds and emeralds shaped in his monogram. It's beautiful. It's expensive. It's exactly the kind of gift an emperor gives. But he also gives her something else, something smaller. He pushes her on a swing in the hotel garden. Not a metaphor, not a symbol, an actual swing, the kind you'd find in any garden, and he pushes her back and forth gently, while the illuminations glow in the background and the mountains stand dark above them. I don't know what to do with that image, honestly. An emperor pushing his fiancée on a garden swing in the dark on the night their engagement is announced to the world. It's so tender. It's so ordinary. It's the kind of thing two people might do if they were just two people, without titles, without empires, without the weight of 40 million lives resting on the quality of their marriage. For a few minutes in that garden, they are just two young people, and the swing goes back and forth and the night smells like pine and candle smoke and the last of the summer flowers. But the swing stops. It always stops. And when Sisi climbs off and walks back into the hotel, she walks back into the machinery. The engagement gifts that pile up in her room over the following days are staggering. A parure of diamonds and opals from Sophie, jewels from the various archdukes and archduchesses, silk and lace from the Viennese court. Each gift is a link in a chain. Each one binds her more tightly to the life she's agreed to enter. She didn't know, when she said yes to the man, that she was also saying yes to all of this. The diamonds, the protocol, the letters of congratulation from monarchs she's never met. The suddenly urgent need to learn French and Italian and court etiquette, and the proper way to address a bishop. There's a letter Franz Josef writes to Sisi during the engagement period, after they've separated and he's returned to Vienna, and she's gone back to Possenhofen to begin her training. "I beg you," he writes, "do not shut yourself away too much in your room. Go out often with your mother and Nene. Don't be sad, my angel. Don't be sad. He can feel it already." Across the distance, through the formal language of imperial correspondence, he can feel her pulling away, retreating into herself, closing the doors of her inner rooms one by one. He doesn't understand why. He loves her. He's given her everything a man in his position can give. He can't see that what she's losing is larger than what she's gaining, that the girl who swam in cold lakes and spoke dialect and climbed trees and answered to nobody is being asked to become someone else entirely, and that the asking is already breaking something inside her that won't grow back. But all of that is still ahead. Tonight the swing is still moving. The candles are still burning on the mountains, and somewhere in the valley the sound of church bells is carrying across the water, marking the hour, counting down toward a future that neither of them can see clearly yet. The night is warm, the light is beautiful, and the girl on the swing is smiling for now. 8 months pass between the engagement and the wedding. 8 months of preparation, of training, of transformation. Sisi goes back to Possenhofen and the machinery follows her there. Tutors in French and Italian, lessons in Habsburg court protocol, fittings for a trousseau that fills trunk after trunk after trunk. Her teeth are fixed, her hair is studied, her posture is corrected. The girl from the lake is being remade, piece by piece, into something the Empire can use. She doesn't take to it well. The transformation is supposed to be thorough. Sophie sends detailed instructions from Vienna about what needs to be improved, and the list is long. Sisi must learn to walk differently, to stand differently, to hold her head at the correct angle. She must study the genealogy of the Habsburg family, which stretches back 600 years and branches into every royal house in Europe. She must memorize the order of precedence at court, who enters a room before whom, who sits where, who is addressed as Your Imperial Highness, and who as Your Serene Highness, and who merely as Your Highness, because these distinctions matter enormously in Vienna. where a single misplaced title can cause a diplomatic incident that lasts for months. The Hungarian lessons bore her. The protocol lessons confuse her. She has nightmares. She cries. She writes to Franz Joseph with a warmth that seems genuine, but also, underneath the warmth, with a growing unease that she can't quite name. She visits Vienna once during the engagement, and the experience overwhelms her. The scale of the Hofburg, the formality of the court, the thousands of eyes that follow her through every room. She goes back to Possenhofen and locks herself in her room and writes poems, but the date is set, April 24th, 1854, and no amount of private dread can stop a Habsburg wedding. The farewell from Munich happens on the 20th of April. It's a formal departure, carriages, dignitaries, the appropriate speeches, but there's a moment in it that catches in the throat if you know what comes after. Before she leaves, Sisi walks through the household and shakes hands with every servant, every single one. The cooks, the maids, the grooms, the gardeners, the porters, the laundry women. She takes each hand and holds it and looks at the person and says something. We don't know what. The sources don't record the words. And then she moves on to the next one. She'll never be allowed to do this again. In Vienna, an empress doesn't touch servants. An empress doesn't look at servants, not really. Not as people with hands you might hold. The distance between the crown and the kitchen is absolute, enforced by centuries of protocol and the kind of casual, physical warmth that comes naturally to a girl raised in a house, where the dog slept on the furniture and the Duke ate lunch with his illegitimate children. That warmth will be treated, in Vienna, as a breach of order. Something to be corrected, something to be trained out of her. But she doesn't know that yet. Right now she's just saying goodbye to the people who helped raise her, the way any young woman would when she's leaving home for the last time. The journey to Vienna takes 3 days. The first leg is by carriage, Munich to Straubing, a town on the Danube in Lower Bavaria, where the river is wide enough and deep enough for the steamship that's waiting. The road is lined with people. Word has travelled ahead, the way word always does in the countryside, passed from village to village by riders and shopkeepers and farmers leaning over fences. The future empress is coming through. School children are assembled along the route, holding flowers, singing songs they've rehearsed for weeks. Church bells ring in every town they pass. It's festive, and it's loud, and it's relentless, and Sisi sits in the carriage beside her mother and waves through the window with a handkerchief, hour after hour, until her arm must ache. At Straubing she boards the steamship. The town has decorated itself for the occasion. Garlands across the streets, flags on every public building, a triumphal arch made of pine branches and paper flowers spanning the road that leads down to the dock. The local dignitaries line up in their best clothes, stiff and nervous and proud, because this is the biggest thing that has ever happened to Straubing, and possibly the biggest thing that ever will. Sisi steps out of the carriage and walks through it all with the numb, slightly glassy expression of someone who's been absorbing ceremony for hours and has run out of space to put any more. The ship is called the Franz Joseph, naturally, and it's been fitted out for this journey with a thoroughness that borders on obsession. The engines are English built, 140 horsepower, manufactured in London, driving 2 enormous paddle wheels that churn the brown Danube water into white foam. Below decks, the main cabin is upholstered in purple velvet, with gilded trim and crystal fixtures and a carpet so thick your feet sink into it. There are sleeping quarters, a dining room, a private sitting room for the bride and her mother. Everything gleams. Everything smells of new fabric and fresh paint and the particular metallic sweetness of a steam engine warming up. But the real spectacle is on deck. Someone, the court event planners presumably, working from a brief that probably said, magnificent but tasteful, has built a canopy of roses over the main deck. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, arranged on a wooden trellis that arches over the ship like a bower. Pink roses, red roses, white roses, their petals shifting in the river breeze, their scent mixing with the smell of coal smoke from the engine and the wet mineral smell of the Danube itself. When the ship pulls away from the dock at Straubing, the roses tremble with the vibration of the engines, and a few loose petals drift down onto the deck like coloured snow. I want to stay with this image for a moment. because there's something about it that captures the whole strange fairy tale turning into something else quality of this story. A girl on a ship covered in roses, sailing down a river toward a new life. It sounds like the opening of a legend, the kind of story that begins with once upon a time and ends with happily ever after. And in a way, it is a legend. It will become one, retold and embroidered and romanticised for 150 years. But right now, on this particular April afternoon, it's just a girl on a boat, and she's pale, and she's quiet, and she can't stop crying. Ludovica is with her. So are various ladies-in-waiting and court officials and the small army of attendants that travels with a future empress. But the person Sisi wants most is her sister Helene, and Helene is not here. The engagement ended whatever easy closeness the two sisters had. Helen carried her disappointment with a dignity that Sisi must have found both admirable and heartbreaking. But the simple truth is that the younger sister got what the older sister was promised, and that kind of wound doesn't heal with a carriage ride and a handshake. Helene will come to the wedding. Duty requires it, but the secret English language they shared, the private jokes, the whispered conversations in their shared bedroom at Posse, all of that is fading. The ship moves downriver. The Danube in this stretch is wide and slow, and the colour of milky coffee, winding through flat farmland and past small towns, whose church steeples rise above the trees like punctuation marks. The countryside slides past in a procession of images, a watermill turning slowly in the current, a herd of cattle standing knee-deep in the shallows, a fisherman in a flat-bottomed boat who stops what he's doing and stares as the rose-covered steamship churns past. Every town they pass fires a salute. Cannons boom from the riverbanks, the sound rolling across the water and echoing off the low hills. Schoolchildren line the shores, waving flags, singing, straining to catch a glimpse of the girl under the roses. Sisi waves her handkerchief. She waves and waves and waves. At Linz there's a formal reception. The provincial authorities in their best clothes, speeches, more cannon fire, a brass band playing something triumphal. Sisi descends from the ship and stands on the dock and accepts bouquets, and listens to addresses and smiles. The smile she's been practicing for 8 months, the one that looks right in public but doesn't reach all the way to her eyes. Then she goes back aboard, and the ship continues downriver. There's a detail from the Linz stop that I keep thinking about. Somewhere along the dock, behind the officials and the bouquets, a group of local women have gathered to watch. They're not aristocrats. They're farmers' wives and shopkeepers' daughters and laundry women, the kind of women who normally wouldn't come within 100 metres of an imperial procession. But they've come today because they want to see the girl. And what they see, according to one account, is a young woman so pale and so visibly frightened that several of them begin to cry. Not from joy, from recognition. They see something in that girl's face that they understand. The look of someone being carried toward a life she hasn't chosen, dressed in clothes that aren't hers, smiling a smile that cost her something. The roses keep trembling in the engine vibration, and the Danube keeps flowing east. The Wachau Valley is the most beautiful stretch. The river narrows here, cutting between steep hillsides covered in vineyards and topped with ruined castles. Dürnstein, where Richard the Lionheart was imprisoned 7 centuries ago, perches on a crag above the water, its blue and white church tower catching the afternoon light. Below it, the terraced vineyards step down to the river in neat green rows, and the air smells of warm stone and grape leaves and the particular dusty sweetness of a valley that's been cultivated for 1,000 years. It's the kind of landscape that makes you want to stop and sit down and look at it for a long time, which is, of course, exactly what Sisi can't do. The ship pushes on. The schedule doesn't pause for beauty. There's something about this river journey that reminds me of something I can't quite name. A feeling more than a thought. The idea of moving towards something you can't stop, on a current you didn't choose. The Danube only flows one direction. The ship only goes forward, and the girl on the deck under her canopy of roses is being carried toward a life she said yes to but never really chose, at a speed that doesn't allow for second thoughts. The roses are beautiful, the river is beautiful, the mountains are beautiful, and none of it changes the fact that she's heading toward a cage made of gold and protocol, and the expectations of 40 million people, and the current won't let her turn around, past Melk, where the great Baroque abbey sits on its bluff above the river like a palace that decided to become a church, past Krems, where the river bends south and the valley opens up, past the small towns whose names she'll never learn, whose people she'll never meet again, whose faces blur together into a single long impression of waving arms and shouted blessings and cannon smoke drifting across the water. By the time the ship approaches Nussdorf, the landing place just upriver from Vienna, it's been 3 days. 3 days of roses and cannons and handkerchiefs and crowds and the constant, grinding, inescapable awareness that every mile brings her closer to the life she's terrified of. The river has widened again here, flowing broad and flat through the outskirts of the capital, and the banks are thick with people. Not hundreds now, but thousands. Tens of thousands. They've come from Vienna and from the surrounding villages, on foot and by carriage and by horse, to see the girl who's going to marry their emperor. The noise is extraordinary. Cheering, singing, bands playing, more cannon fire from the fortifications along the river, church bells from every steeple in the district ringing simultaneously. And then Franz Josef appears. He's been waiting at Nussdorf, unable to contain himself. When the ship comes into view, this improbable floating rose garden, paddling slowly upriver against the current, trailing a banner of coal smoke, he doesn't wait for it to dock. He can't wait. He walks to the very edge of the landing stage, and as the ship draws alongside, he leaps from the shore onto the deck and takes Sisi in his arms and kisses her, right there, in front of the tens of thousands of spectators lining the banks and the dignitaries on the dock, and the ladies in waiting and the court officials and every newspaper correspondent in the empire. It's not protocol. Emperors don't jump onto boats. Emperors don't kiss their fiancés in public. The leap itself is physically reckless. The gap between the dock and the moving ship is real, and if he'd missed, the consequences for the empire would have been rather more dramatic than a wet uniform. But he does it anyway, because he's 23, and he's in love, and he's been waiting for months, and for one unguarded second the Emperor of Austria behaves like a young man who can't wait another minute to see the girl he's going to marry. I think that leap is the last truly spontaneous thing Franz Josef ever does. After this, after the wedding, after the honeymoon, after the years of marriage and disappointment and Sophie's interference, and Sisi's retreating and the slow, grinding erosion of whatever connected them in that garden in Ischl, he'll retreat back into the machinery. He'll become the emperor who sits at his desk before dawn and reads every report and answers every letter, and shows nothing on his face that hasn't been approved by protocol. But right now, right here, on this dock, he jumps. And it's beautiful. And it's the last time. Sisi has brought ashore. She's changed into a pink silk dress for the arrival. The rose-coloured gown that's been prepared for this moment, with a diamond diadem in her hair and pearls at her throat. She looks, by all accounts, magnificent. She also looks terrified. The photographs from this period, the first formal portraits, show a young woman of striking beauty with enormous dark eyes and a mouth that seems to be holding back something it doesn't want to say. The beauty is real. The terror behind it is also real. A glass carriage is waiting. It's drawn by 8 Lipizzaner horses, white as milk, their harnesses trimmed with gold. The carriage itself is a work of art, crystal panels, velvet upholstery, gold leaf on every surface that will hold it. It's designed to be transparent so that the crowds can see the bride inside. There's no hiding in this carriage. Every face she makes, every tear she sheds, every moment of the journey from Nussdorf to the gates of Vienna is visible to anyone close enough to look. And she cries. She cries the entire way. The tears start when she gets into the carriage and they don't stop. She waves. She's been waving for 3 days. She knows how to wave. But she's crying while she does it. Openly, visibly, and the people who see her face through the glass panels of the carriage are moved by it, because they interpret the tears as emotion, as overwhelm, as the touching spectacle of a young girl overcome by the magnitude of her good fortune. And maybe that's partly what it is, but it's also grief. It's also fear. It's also the tears of a girl who said, if only he weren't an emperor and meant it, and who is now sitting in an emperor's glass carriage, wearing an emperor's diamonds, being driven toward an emperor's palace, watched by an emperor's subjects, and there is no way out. The current only flows one direction. The ship only goes forward. And the roses are beautiful, and the horses are white, and the girl in the glass box is weeping. At some point during the procession, the diamond diadem catches on the frame of the carriage door. Sisi stumbles. The diadem is wrenched sideways. Hands reach out to steady it, to fix it, to put it back in place. It's a small moment. Nobody is hurt, nothing is broken, but the court will whisper about it afterward as an omen. The crown doesn't sit easily on this girl's head. It never will. The procession reaches Schönbrunn, the gates open, the palace swallows her. The roses on the ship are already wilting in the April sun, their petals curling brown at the edges, falling softly onto the empty deck where nobody is standing anymore. 3 days pass between Sisi's arrival in Vienna and the wedding. 3 days of receptions and introductions and fittings and rehearsals, each one more exhausting than the last. She's staying at the Theresianum, a former palace on the Wieden that's been converted into an academy for the sons of the nobility, and the building has been cleared and redecorated for the bride's use. The rooms are enormous, the ceilings are very high, the corridors echo when she walks through them, and the servants, dozens of them, none of whom she knows, move around her with the silent, choreographed precision of people who've been trained to be invisible. She's miserable. The Viennese aristocracy has been streaming through to pay their respects, and each visit is a test of her bearing, her conversation, her French, her ability to remember names and titles, and the correct form of address for a woman whose husband is a prince of the blood but whose father was only a count. Sisi fails these tests more often than she passes them. She speaks too quietly. She looks at the floor. She reverts to Bavarian dialect when she's nervous, which is almost always. The ladies of the court notice everything and forgive nothing. She tells her mother this quietly, in the few private moments they manage to steal between official engagements. She tells her that the rooms are too big and the people are too many, and the protocol is too complicated, and she wants to go home. Ludovica listens and says the things mothers say. It will get better. You'll adjust. This is your duty now. But she can see what's happening to her daughter and she can't stop it. On the 23rd of April, 1854, the wedding day, Vienna stages one of the great spectacles of the 19th century. The formal procession begins at the Theresianum in the afternoon. Sisi emerges in a wedding gown of white and silver, heavy with embroidery. The train so long it requires attendants to carry it. The diamond diadem is fixed in her hair, which has been arranged by professional hairdressers into an elaborate structure that must weigh as much as a small animal. She looks, by every account, breathtakingly beautiful. She also looks, to anyone who knows her well enough to read the signs, absolutely rigid with fear. The procession to the Augustiner Kirche is a display of imperial power so elaborate it borders on the surreal. Hungarian magnates ride at the front in their traditional national dress, fur-trimmed cloaks heavy with gold embroidery, jewelled sabres at their sides, riding horses whose harnesses glitter with precious stones. Behind them come the Austrian nobles, the military officers in full dress, the court officials in their ceremonial robes, the diplomatic corps in their national costumes. The carriages are gilded, their wheels freshly lacquered, their springs creaking under the weight of velvet cushions and embroidered canopies. The horses are matched, teams of 6, teams of 8, their coats brushed to a shine that catches the April sunlight and throws it back in small bright flashes. The whole procession is a river of colour and metal and movement, flowing through streets that have been swept and decorated and lined with fresh sand to muffle the sound of the hooves. Flowers are thrown from the windows above, roses, carnations, whatever the Viennese florists could supply in April, and they land on the carriages and the horses and the cobblestones, so that the air smells of crushed petals and horse sweat and the faint burnt sugar scent of celebratory gunpowder. The streets are lined with soldiers standing at attention, and behind the soldiers the crowds press and surge and crane their necks, and the noise, the cheering, the bands, the bells, the cannon salutes from the city bastions, is so loud and so continuous that it becomes a kind of weather, something you move through rather than listen to. I keep thinking about what it must be like to be inside this procession rather than watching it. From the outside it looks like a fairy tale. The beautiful bride, the golden carriages, the white horses, the cheering crowds. From the inside, from Sisi's position at the centre of this enormous machine of ceremony, it must feel like being swallowed. Every eye is on her. Every movement she makes is being evaluated. She can't scratch her nose, can't adjust her diadem, can't shift her weight in the carriage without someone noticing and someone else writing about it. She's a spectacle. She's the most looked at person in the most looked at city in Europe on the most looked at day of the year. And she's 16 years old, and she's from a house where the dog slept on the furniture. The Augustinerkirche, the Church of the Augustinians, is the traditional site of Habsburg weddings. It's a tall, narrow Gothic church in the heart of Vienna, connected to the Hofburg by a covered passage, and on this afternoon it has been transformed into something that barely resembles a place of worship. 15,000 candles burn in every available space, in the chandeliers, on the altars, in candelabras lining the walls, in holders fixed to the ends of every pew. The light is extraordinary. It fills the church with a warm, slightly trembling glow that makes the red velvet draping, yards and yards of it, covering every surface, look like the inside of a jewel box. The heat from 15,000 flames is significant. The air is thick and sweet with melted wax. 70 bishops and archbishops are assembled in full ceremonial vestments, mitres, croziers, embroidered chasubles that represent centuries of accumulated ecclesiastical wealth. They line the sanctuary like a chorus of gold and white, and the effect is overwhelming, deliberately so. This is not a church. This is a statement. This is the Habsburg dynasty saying, with 15,000 points of flame, that its power is absolute, and its continuity is assured, and the girl walking up this aisle is no longer a person but a symbol. Sisi walks toward the altar. The train of her dress stretches behind her, carried by attendants who move in careful synchronization, like a very slow, very expensive caterpillar. Franz Joseph is waiting at the altar in the uniform of a field marshal, his chest covered in medals, his posture so perfect it looks painful. He watches her come toward him, and those who are close enough to see his face say that his expression is one of pure, uncomplicated happiness. He has no doubts. He has no reservations. He's getting exactly what he wants. Cardinal Rauscher performs the ceremony. He's the Archbishop of Vienna, a man of considerable learning and even more considerable verbosity, and his wedding address is, there's no kind way to say this, far too long. The congregation shifts in the pews. The candles drip. The heat builds. Rauscher speaks about duty and faith and the sacred obligations of marriage and the particular responsibilities of a sovereign union, and he speaks and speaks and speaks until the court wits, in the days that follow, begin calling him Cardinal Plauscher, Cardinal Chatterbox. It's cruel, and it sticks, and it's the kind of nickname that tells you everything about how the Viennese court handles discomfort. Not with protest, with wit. Sisi stands through all of it. She stands in her heavy dress with her heavy crown on her head and her heavy future pressing down on her shoulders, and she doesn't faint, which is more than some brides have managed in this church. The ceremony has been going on for what feels like hours, and the physical toll is real. The heat is ferocious. 15,000 candles in a confined space create the climate of a greenhouse, and the air smells like beeswax and incense and the collective perspiration of several hundred overdressed aristocrats. Her face, those who can see it, is very pale and very still. The rings are exchanged. The moment Franz Joseph slides the ring onto Sisi's finger, a signal is given, and the cannons on the city bastions fire a salvo that shakes the windows of the church. The sound is enormous, a physical blow of compressed air and thunder that rolls across the rooftops of Vienna and echoes off the hills beyond the city. Inside the church, the vibration loosens candle wax from the chandeliers. Tiny drops fall like warm rain onto the shoulders and bare heads of the congregation below. Nobody moves. Nobody flinches. This is protocol. There's something about that cannon salvo that I find quietly brutal. The moment of union, the moment where two people are supposed to be joined in something intimate and sacred, is announced to the world with an explosion. Not with bells, not with music, but with the same sound the army makes when it fires on an enemy position. The message isn't subtle. This marriage isn't about two people. It's about power. It's about the continuation of a dynasty that has held Central Europe together for 600 years, and the cannon fire is a reminder to everyone within earshot that the force behind that dynasty is real. After the ceremony, the newlyweds are driven back to the Hofburg for the formal reception. The Hofburg is the imperial palace in the centre of Vienna, a vast labyrinthine complex of buildings that has been expanded and rebuilt over centuries until it occupies an entire city block. The reception takes place in a series of enormous staterooms, each one more ornate than the last, and the guest list includes virtually every person of consequence in the empire. Archdukes, ambassadors, generals, ministers, bishops, provincial governors, court officials, ladies-in-waiting, and a supporting cast of several hundred lesser nobles who have travelled to Vienna specifically for this occasion. Sisi is required to stand in a receiving line and greet them all. This is where it begins to fall apart. The receiving line at a Habsburg state reception is not a casual affair. Each guest approaches according to strict protocol, executes the appropriate bow or curtsy, receives a word or two from the Empress and moves on. The pace is steady, the line is long, the faces blur, the curtsies repeat. The same words are said again and again. Congratulations, best wishes, the honour, the privilege, until they lose all meaning and become just sounds, like the dripping of the candle wax. And every interaction is governed by rules that Sisi has been studying for 8 months and still hasn't fully internalised. At some point during the reception, the sources aren't precise about exactly when, Sisi sees a group of young women approaching in the line and recognises them. They're her cousins, girls she grew up with, girls she played with at Possenhofen, girls whose faces belong to the world she's just lost, and something breaks. She steps forward, opens her arms, and tries to embrace them. The room freezes. An empress does not embrace people in a receiving line. An empress stands still and extends her hand, and the person approaching kisses the hand, and that is the interaction. The physical distance between the crown and everyone else is absolute. It's not a suggestion. It's not a preference. It's the architecture of the whole system, and Sisi has just walked through it like it wasn't there. "But we're cousins," she says, bewildered, and there's something in those 3 words that contains the entire tragedy of her situation. She still thinks the old rules apply. She still thinks she's the girl from Posse, the one who shook hands with servants and spoke dialect with farm children and hugged her relatives when she saw them. She doesn't understand yet, won't understand for months, maybe years, that the girl from Posse is gone. That person has been replaced by a title, and the title has rules, and the rules don't care about your feelings. Sophie intervenes, quietly, firmly, with the practiced efficiency of a woman who has been managing protocol breaches for 30 years. She guides Sisi back to the correct position, corrects the physical distance, restores the proper form. The hand-kissing resumes, the line moves forward, the moment passes, but it doesn't pass for Sisi. Shortly after the cousins incident, she leaves the receiving line, not with permission, not according to any plan, but simply by walking away, and is found in a side room crying. The side room is small. The door is closed. On the other side of it, the reception continues without her, the machinery grinding on, and the new Empress of Austria is sitting alone in a small room weeping, with her diamond crown crooked on her head and her hands shaking in her lap. They find her. They always find her. Someone, a lady-in-waiting or Ludovica or perhaps Sophie herself, goes to the side room and brings her back, and Sisi dries her eyes and straightens her crown and walks back into the reception and continues to greet the line, and nobody speaks about what just happened. Not publicly, not officially. In the court diary, the wedding reception is recorded as a great success. Outside the Hofburg, Vienna celebrates. Johann Strauss has composed a new piece for the occasion, the Elisabeth Klänge, the Sounds of Elisabeth, and it's being played in concert halls and on street corners and by the military band stationed at intervals along the Ringstrasse. The city is illuminated, every public building outlined in gas jets and oil lamps, and the effect at night is stunning. The whole city centre glows, reflected in the waters of the Danube Canal, and the crowds move through the lit streets with the happy, aimless energy of people who've been given a reason to stay up late and drink. There's a detail about the wedding that most histories mention only in passing, but I think it's worth sitting with. As part of the celebrations, Franz Joseph issues a general amnesty. Political prisoners are released, fines are remitted, 200,000 gulden are distributed to the poor. These are the gestures a sovereign makes when he wants his happiness to be shared. The idea being that the emperor's joy should overflow, like water from a fountain, and reach even the lowest levels of society. But think about who those political prisoners are. They're the men arrested after the 1848 revolution. Hungarians, Italians, Czechs, Democrats, liberals, people who wanted constitutions and civil rights and an end to absolutism. They've been sitting in Habsburg prisons for 6 years, and now they're being released not because the emperor has changed his mind about their cause, but because he's getting married and it makes the day look better. Their freedom is a wedding decoration, like the 15,000 candles or the roses on the ship. It costs the dynasty nothing, and it buys goodwill. And if the freedmen have opinions about being used as ornaments for someone else's happiness, those opinions are not recorded. I think about this sometimes. The strange mathematics of imperial celebration. A girl weeping in a side room while the city dances outside. Prisoners walking free because a young man fell in love with the wrong sister. 15,000 candles burning for 4 hours at a cost that could have fed a village for a year. Everything about this day is enormous, and everything about it is contradictory. And at the centre of it, tiny and overwhelmed and still wearing a dress that weighs more than she does, is a 16-year-old girl who just wanted to swim in a lake. The night deepens. The candles in the Augustiner Kirche have been extinguished, leaving trails of hardened wax down the sides of every surface they touched. The red velvet is being taken down. The flowers are being removed. The church is returning to its ordinary shape, the way a theatre returns to its ordinary shape after the set is struck. And somewhere in the Hofburg, behind doors that are now closed and guarded, the new empress is being prepared for bed. Sophie and Ludovica escort her. The two mothers, the two sisters, the two women who engineered this marriage from opposite ends of the family. They walk their daughter to the bridal chamber, and what happens behind that door belongs to the next part of our story. The city is still celebrating outside, the lights are still burning, but inside the palace, the corridors are quiet and the candles have been dimmed, and the weight of the crown has settled onto the head of a girl who isn't ready to carry it. 15,000 candles, and every one of them has gone out. Sophie and Ludovica walk their daughter to the bridal chamber. The two sisters, the two mothers, the two women who between them arranged every detail of this marriage, from the first letter about Helene to the last fitting of the wedding gown. They escort the new Empress of Austria down a corridor of the Hofburg to a room prepared with flowers and candles and fresh linen, and they leave her there. One account describes Sisi in that moment as looking like a frightened bird hiding in its nest, curled in on herself, small against the enormous bed, her face turned away. That image stays with me, not because of what happens next, which belongs to the privacy of two people, and which will pass over the way the night passes over a house, quietly and without entering, but because of what it tells us about where Sisi is, emotionally, at this moment. She's been a bride for exactly 6 hours. She's been an empress for exactly 6 hours, and she's already hiding. The next morning comes early, and it comes with visitors. Both mothers arrive at the newlyweds' breakfast, not by invitation, not by arrangement. They simply come, early, together, and they sit down, and they separate the young couple, each mother taking her own child aside for what Sophie's diary describes, with devastating matter-of-factness, as a confidential conversation. Vertrauliche Unterredung. Sophie takes Franz Josef into one room. Ludovica takes Sisi into another, and they ask. I need to be careful here, because the sources are both explicit and deeply uncomfortable about what these conversations contained. What matters for our story is this. Sophie wanted to know whether the marriage had been consummated. She asked her son directly. She recorded the answer in her diary, and by the end of that day, through the efficient channels of court gossip, the entire Hofburg knew the intimate details of the Empress's wedding night. Every archduchess, every lady-in-waiting, every chamberlain and adjutant and footman, they all knew, because Sophie told her ladies, and the ladies told their husbands, and the husbands told their colleagues, and the information spread through the palace like water through a cracked wall. There's something here that I think deserves a moment of quiet attention, because it sets the pattern for everything that follows. Sisi has no privacy. She has never had privacy, not since the moment Franz Josef looked at her across that tea table initial. But until now, the lack of privacy has been external. Crowds watching, courtiers evaluating, cameras, well, early photographers, capturing her image. This is different. This is Sophie walking into the most intimate room of Sisi's life and opening every drawer and reading every page and reporting what she finds to the entire household. There is no door in this palace that Sophie can't open. There is no part of Sisi's existence, not her body, not her feelings, not her marriage, that Sophie considers off-limits. And Sisi, who grew up in a house where the doors were mostly open because nobody needed to close them, is now in a house where the doors are always open because she isn't allowed to close them. The honeymoon begins. It takes place at Laxenburg, a small palace in the countryside south of Vienna. Pretty, surrounded by parkland, quieter than the Hofburg. It's supposed to be a retreat, a chance for the young couple to be alone together, to learn each other's rhythms, to build the foundation of a marriage that will have to sustain them both through decades of public duty. It isn't anything of the kind. Laxenburg itself is lovely, in the way that all Habsburg properties are lovely, not by accident but by design. Every tree placed according to a landscape architect's plan, every view arranged for maximum picturesque effect. There's a lake with a folly island. There are paths through parkland that go on for miles. The rooms are smaller than the Hofburgs, more intimate, better lit. On a warm April evening with the windows open and the smell of cut grass coming in from the park, you could almost forget that you're inside the machinery. Almost, but the servants still move in formation. The meals still arrive at fixed times, and the shadow of Vienna, of Sophie, of the court, of the empire, falls across every room. Franz Josef commutes. Every morning before the sun is properly up, he leaves Laxenburg and rides to the Hofburg to work. The state papers, the audiences, the dispatches, the endless machinery of absolute rule that doesn't pause for love. He's gone all day. He comes back in the evening, tired, distracted, already thinking about tomorrow's agenda. He adores Sisi. His letters from this period are full of affection and longing, but he doesn't know how to be present with her. He doesn't know how to sit still in a room with another person and just be there. He's been trained for duty, not for companionship. The desk is where he feels most himself, and the desk is in Vienna, and Sisi is in Laxenburg, and the distance between the two grows a little wider every day. And Sophie comes to visit, every day, sometimes twice. She arrives at Laxenburg in the morning, after Franz Josef has left, and she stays for hours. She inspects, she corrects, she instructs. She treats the new empress not as a daughter-in-law, but as a project, a piece of raw material that needs to be shaped and polished and made fit for its intended purpose. The corrections are constant. Sisi holds her fork wrong. Sisi stands at the wrong angle. Sisi spoke to the wrong person in the wrong order. Sisi's hair isn't right. Sisi's dress isn't right. Sisi's expression isn't right. Gräfin Esterhazy, Countess Esterhazy, Sophie's chosen lady-in-waiting for Sisi, functions less as a companion and more as a governess. She shadows Sisi through the day, monitoring her behaviour, reporting to Sophie, correcting lapses in protocol with the patient, relentless firmness of a woman who's been given a job and intends to do it thoroughly. Esterhazy is not unkind. She's simply doing what she's been told to do, which is to turn a Bavarian girl into a Habsburg empress in the shortest possible time. She corrects Sisi's posture at dinner. She reminds her which title belongs to which archduchess. She tells her, gently but firmly, that she may not befriend the younger ladies in waiting, because an empress does not have friends among her staff. She has servants, and the relationship between them is defined by distance, not affection. Sisi tries once to form something like a friendship with one of the younger women in her household. Sophie discovers it immediately and reassigns the woman. The message is clear. You're not to have allies. You're not to build a private circle. You belong to the court, and the court belongs to Sophie, and every relationship you form will be monitored and managed and, if necessary, terminated. The small freedoms disappear one by one, so gradually that each individual loss seems trivial. She can't walk to the theatre by the short route through the interior corridors. She must take the long way around, the ceremonial route, because the short route passes through areas where she might encounter people of insufficient rank. Her shoes, once worn, must be given away. The Empress doesn't wear shoes a second time. Her clothing is chosen for her, not by Sisi, not even by a trusted dresser, but according to a protocol that specifies which garments are appropriate for which occasions, which colours may be worn on which days, which jewels are required for which level of ceremony. Her daily routine is planned for her. The meals are at fixed times in fixed rooms with fixed company. Every hour is accounted for. Every movement is observed. There's a particular detail about the shoes that I keep coming back to, because it captures something essential about the nature of this cage. It's not cruel exactly. Nobody is being beaten. Nobody's going hungry. The shoes are beautiful. The clothes are exquisite. The rooms are the finest in Europe. But the point of the shoes, the point of all of it, is that Sisi doesn't get to choose. She doesn't get to decide that she likes a pair of shoes and wants to wear them again tomorrow. The decision has been made for her by centuries of precedent and protocol, and her feelings about it are irrelevant. The cage is made of gold, but it's still a cage. The bars are silk and diamond, but they don't bend. And then Helene leaves. Her older sister has been in Vienna for the wedding, staying nearby, providing the one connection to home that Sisi has left. The two of them have been communicating in English, a private language, a secret code, a way of saying things to each other that the German-speaking court can't understand. It's their last surviving intimacy, this shared language, the last thread connecting the girl on the swing at Posse to the Empress in the Hofburg. When Helene goes home to Bavaria, the thread breaks. The English conversations stop. The private language dies. Sisi is alone in a way she's never been alone before, surrounded by hundreds of people, attended every moment of every day, watched and monitored and corrected and dressed and undressed and escorted, and utterly, completely alone. There's nobody in this palace who belongs to her. There's nobody she chose. There's nobody who knew her before she became this thing, this title, this symbol in a diamond crown. She starts writing poems. She's always written poems. The sad verses about Richard, the melancholy scraps in her hidden book at Possenhofen. But the poems she writes now are different. They're sharper, they're more deliberate. They have a clarity that comes from real suffering. Not from the romantic sadness of a teenager, but from the specific, daily, grinding anguish of a person who's been placed in a life that doesn't fit her, and who can see, with terrible precision, exactly what she's lost. She writes about a bird in a cage. She writes about waking up in a prison. She writes about longing, Sehnsucht, that untranslatable German word that means something deeper than mere wanting, something closer to the ache of being separated from the place where you belong. The poems aren't great literature. They're not meant to be. They're the private record of a young woman trying to understand what's happened to her, scratching her feelings into paper because there's nobody in this palace she can say them to. One poem from this period contains an image that I can't get out of my head. She describes waking in a dungeon and feeling an enormous longing growing inside her, and knowing that freedom is gone, the dungeon is the Hofburg, the chains are the protocol, the longing is for Possenhofen, for the lake, for the horses, for the dialect, for the sound of a house where nobody was watching. She's 16 years old and she's the Empress of Austria and she's writing about chains. And then there's the other sentence, the one that echoes the thing she said initial 8 months ago, the one that closes the circle. She says it to someone where we don't know who, a lady in waiting perhaps, or maybe she writes it in a letter. I do love him so much. If only he were a tailor. If only he were a tailor. Not an emperor. A tailor. Someone small, someone ordinary, someone who comes home from work in the evening with thread on his cuffs and eats dinner at a normal table, and sleeps in a normal bed and doesn't have a mother who opens every door and reads every diary and monitors every breakfast. She said if only he weren't an emperor before the engagement, and she means it even more now, because now she knows what the crown actually costs. It cost everything. It cost the lake. It cost the dialect. It cost the shoes you liked and wanted to wear again. It cost the sister who spoke English with you. It cost the ability to hug your cousins. It cost the right to walk down a corridor without someone following you and writing down where you went. She loves him. That's the part that makes this so much worse than a simple story of captivity. She loves the man. She just can't survive the title. Franz Josef, for his part, is bewildered. He writes to his mother during the honeymoon with a confusion that's almost childlike. He doesn't understand why Sisi cries. He doesn't understand why she retreats to her room. He doesn't understand why the beautiful girl from Ischl, the one with the braids and the shy smile, seems to be disappearing into someone he doesn't recognise. He loves her. He tells her so, often, in letters and in person, with a sincerity that nobody has ever doubted. He brings her gifts, small things, thoughtful things, the kind of presents a young man gives when he's trying to show a girl that he pays attention. He arranges outings. He suggests walks in the park at Laxenburg. He tries to be what she needs, but he doesn't know what she needs because nobody has ever needed anything from him except obedience and competence, and those are the only currencies he knows how to spend. But he can't see the cage. He's lived inside it his whole life. It's invisible to him, the way water is invisible to a fish. The protocol, the surveillance, the total absence of privacy. To Franz Josef, these aren't restrictions. They're just the way things are. They're the way things have always been. And when Sisi weeps about them, he doesn't understand because he's never known anything else. Sophie watches all of this and draws her own conclusions. The girl is difficult. The girl is moody. The girl is ungrateful. Sophie has given Sisi everything, a crown, a palace, the most eligible husband in Europe, diamonds, silk, servants, a place in history, and the girl responds by crying and writing poems and trying to hug people in receiving lines. In Sophie's view, the problem isn't the system, the problem is the girl. The girl needs to be managed more firmly. The girl needs more correction, more instruction, more oversight. The solution to Sisi's unhappiness in Sophie's mind is more of the thing that's causing it. And so the cage tightens. It tightens with love, which makes it worse. Sophie genuinely believes she's helping. Franz Joseph genuinely believes he's providing. The court genuinely believes it's honouring. Nobody in this palace thinks they're building a prison. They think they're building a life. The best possible life. The life that any woman in Europe would envy. And they can't understand. Truly, honestly can't understand why the girl inside it keeps trying to get out. Week by week, month by month, the small freedoms shrink, and the large ones were never there to begin with, and the girl who swam in cold lakes becomes the empress who stands at windows looking out at gardens. She isn't allowed to walk in alone, wearing shoes she'll never wear again, living in rooms that are never quite hers, married to a man she loves but can't reach, governed by a woman she can't escape, missing a home she'll never go back to. The Danube is still flowing outside, the roses on the ship have long since died, and somewhere in the largest palace in Vienna, in a room with very high ceilings and very heavy curtains, a 16-year-old girl sits at a writing desk and puts her pen to paper and tries to find the words for what it feels like to be given everything in the world except the one thing you actually wanted. She wanted to be free. She wanted to be ordinary. She wanted to be loved without being watched. If only he were a tailor. The candle on her desk flickers. The palace is quiet, and outside the window, far away, too far to see, the lake at Possenhofen is still and dark and waiting for a girl who isn't coming home. So that's the story. Or rather, that's the beginning of it. The first chapter of a life that will stretch on for another 44 years, through escapes and returns and long solitary journeys across Europe, through the birth of children she won't be allowed to raise, through a slow, complicated, deeply human marriage that neither of them quite knows how to save. But all of that is later. Tonight we stayed with the beginning. The lake, the braids, the black dress and the tea party, the flowers she didn't understand, the swing in the garden, the roses on the ship, the 15,000 candles, and the quiet room in the palace where a girl with a pen tries to write her way back to the place she belongs. I keep thinking about how close the two versions of this story sit to each other. The fairy tale and the cage, the emperor leaping onto a boat because he can't wait another second, and the mother walking into a breakfast she wasn't invited to, the diamond crown and the pair of shoes you'll never wear again. They're the same story. They're happening to the same people in the same rooms at the same time. The only difference is where you're standing when you look at it. And maybe that's what stays with me most about Sisi. Not the beauty, not the tragedy, not the poems or the diamonds or the roses. It's the honesty. She said, if only he weren't an emperor when she was 15, and she said if only he were a tailor when she was 16, and both times she meant it completely and both times nobody listened. She told them the truth from the very first day. She told them exactly what she needed and exactly what she couldn't bear. And they gave her everything except the one thing she asked for. There are people like that in every century. People who tell you what they need, plainly and simply, and the world nods and smiles and gives them something else. If you've ever been that person, if you've ever said the true thing and watched it be heard as something different, then maybe you understand a little of what it felt like to be a girl from a lake, sitting in a palace, writing poems that nobody would read for 100 years. If any of this stayed with you tonight, a moment, an image, a feeling you can't quite name, you're welcome to leave a few words below. There's no right thing to say, just whatever comes to mind. I always read them, and they always matter. This is boring history for sleep, and this is what we do here. We take the quiet corners of the past and we sit in them for a while, slowly, without hurrying, and we let them carry us toward rest. There are so many more of these stories waiting. Medieval kitchens and Roman bathhouses and Georgian country roads, and the daily rhythms of lives that ended centuries ago, but still feel warm when you hold them up to the light. If you'd like to come back for another one, you're warmly welcome to subscribe. There's no rush. It'll be here when you need it. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for listening this far. I hope the story was good company. Sleep well. The lake is still there. The mountains haven't moved.